Chapter 411. It was a call from his mother. Sol Ji-hoo pressed the answer button even in his confused state. "Mother? Gu, Ji-hoo." A voice mixed with tears immediately struck his ear. Sol Ji-hoo's heart sank. "You rascal, why weren't you picking up your phone?" "Mother. I'm sorry. I was just a little too busy." "Still. Do you have any idea how much Woo-sok and I—" "Mother, calm down. Just what happened?" An unknown nervousness slowly crept up inside him. But Sol Ji-hoo suppressed the feeling and asked. Then. Well. The uneasy sense of foreboding came true. "Come again?" Sol Ji-hoo's eyes widened. What was that?" He almost let go of his phone. Jin-hee was. It was then. A policeman was lying in the middle of the street. A gunshot echoed out from an unknown place, and he could even hear the news report coming from the TV he had turned on subconsciously. The screen was saying this: shooting in downtown area, 2 policemen dead. Around 6 pages when crowds of people getting out of work were flocking to the streets. I don't know whether the police opened fire first or if it was the gunman, but I heard one gunshot, followed by a series of shots. The culprit was hiding in the bushes, firing his gun. Miss Sol, a 23-year-old college student who was walking by the area, was hit by the gunman's bullet in her stomach. His mother's crying voice, the anchor's explanation, and the eyewitness testimonies mixed together and agitated his mind. Sol Ji-hoo's mind went blank. Jin-hee? Where's Jin-hee? His voice trembled. His pupils, throat, hands, and entire body shuddered. Of all people, his younger sister had been shot. At this point in time, it was too much of a coincidence. What about father? And you? And Hung, and Sonhwa, and Sung-hae? Where are you all? We're at Soyoung Hospital. I'll be there right away. Sol Ji-hoo turned around. He was no longer even thinking about the text messages. Confirming Sol Jin-hee's health became his top priority. And so, he ran out of his room as soon as he hung up. But, kook! He ran into someone outside. When he raised his eyes in a startle, he saw a tall, willowy man in a black suit. He was standing in front of the door, looking at him through black sunglasses. Sol Ji-hoo started, remembering Kim Hana telling him to be careful, but upon looking at him again, he realized he knew the man. The man took off his sunglasses. It was the Triad's executive, Ming Jia. As if he had no intention of harming Sol Ji-hoo, Ming Jia raised his left arm and gestured toward the hallway. He seemed to be telling Sol Ji-hoo to come with him. In front of the house, several black sedans were lined up and waiting. Sol Ji-hoo got in one of the sedans, and when the car went down the sloped road in front of his apartment and entered the main street, Sol Ji-hoo took in a short breath. It wasn't just in front of his house. From the alleyways connecting to the main street, black sedans popped out one after the other. They drove beside the sedan Sol Ji-hoo was in while maintaining a fixed distance. Ming Jia tapped Sol Ji-hoo's shoulder. He then handed him a phone, which was already in a call. Hello? It's me. This must be the first time we're talking on Earth. A man spoke in fluent Korean. Sol Ji-hoo recognized the voice. Mr. Hao Win? Given the situation, I'll keep it short and simple. Hao Win cleared his throat from across the phone. First, your younger sister is okay. She was moved to a nearby hospital immediately after the shooting. She received emergency treatment there and was transferred to Soyoung Hospital afterward. Her surgery was a success, and she escaped with her life. Hao Win's assurance calmed Sol Ji-hoo's beating heart at least a bit. Sinyoung acted faster than we thought. That was until he heard these words. Soyoung Hospital has its best doctors and nurses tending to her 24/7. They're paying for 100% of her medical expenses, and the executive director personally went and wished a speedy recovery. You can see how much they're caring for her. Sol Ji-hoo doubted his ears.
It was because he suspected Sin-young was behind the attack when he heard Sol Jin-hee was shot. Sin-young is helping? I know what you're thinking.
It's certainly suspicious.
But you need to think clear-headedly and look at the truth that's been shown. Hao Win continued. The triads and Cecilia were taking turns guarding your family members.
Cecilia was in charge of your younger sister.
But it seems there was a little mishap.
The attacker was shot at the scene. Though it's not someone we know, we can assume Jung Minjong is behind this. It's not surprising for Sin-young to have acted quickly after losing track of him.
Jung Minjong disappeared after being let go by the police, but since Tatiana Chinzia and the Mafia are chasing after him with bloodshot eyes, so it should only be a matter of time before he's caught.
This is what has been revealed so far. Hao Win spoke calmly and reported the findings.
If I may give you a word of advice, return to paradise as soon as possible. The situation has been taken care of for the most part, but we don't know what else might happen. I understand how you must feel right now, so I won't tell you to return immediately. But to be blunt, there isn't much you can do here.
You might be the next target. I'm sure it isn't just Jung Minjong who's gritting his teeth, looking for an opportunity to strike.
The triads and Cecilia are both going to increase our guard.
Perhaps Sin-young will, too.
Hao Win paused briefly before continuing.
If you plan on staying here, we will make protecting you our top priority. Of course, that naturally means the guard around your family members will get thinner. I want you to know that. Long story short, he was telling Sol Jihoo to leave the matter on Earth to the experts. I understand. Good. Hold on to the phone Ming Jia gave you. We'll update you if we make any progress on the matter. I'm sure it will come in handy somehow. Got it.
Before Sol Jihoo hung up, Hao Win added one last thing. Don't forget.
You can't let your emotions get the better of you.
This is the time when we need to act wisely.
Asterisk.
Sol Jihoo arrived at the hospital.
The sedan stopped in front of the main gate.
Ming Jia bowed after getting out of the car. Sol Jihoo expressed his thanks and hurriedly ran into the hospital. After asking the receptionist, he heard that Sol Jin-hee was in a private room that ordinary people could not enter. It supposedly cost more than 1 million won per day.
Sol Jihoo was guided to the highest floor of the hospital and saw Sol Wusok sitting on a bench in the hallway with his head lowered. Hung. Sol Wusok flinched. Jihoo. He raised his head and got up as soon as he saw Sol Jihoo.
Why is it so hard to get hold of you?
Though he was suppressing his voice,
he had a critical tone.
Sorry, I left my phone at home. You didn't have your phone on you while working? I have a separate phone for work.
Let me see.
Sol Jihoo took out the phone that Ming Jia gave him.
Sol Wusok, who was looking at him suspiciously, spoke. When did you hear about Jin-hee getting hurt?
Today, when I called mother.
Your company didn't say anything?
All I was told was that something happened and that I should go back home.
They didn't tell me anything specific even when I asked.
Sol Wusok furrowed his brows.
He was clearly confused, but he shook his head dismissively.
Fine.
How's Jin-hee?
Sol Wusok pointed to the hospital room.
Sol Jihoo carefully opened the door. He smelled a strong smell of alcohol as soon as he entered.
Beep. 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 The patient monitoring system made periodic beeps while drawing a graph.
And on the bed next to it, Sol Jihoo could see Sol Jin-hee lying with her eyes closed. She was breathing regularly with a long IV attached to her left arm.
Sol Jihoo walked forward step by step and kneeled in front of the bed.
She was shot. A bullet went through her stomach, making a hole.
She was a kid who never once got a cut.
How painful must it have been?
It's because of me.
Sol Jihoo grabbed Sol Jin-hee's feeble hands and pressed them on his forehead.
Director Yun Seyahui came to visit early morning. Sol Wusok's voice rang out behind him. She said she was shocked after seeing the news and looked into the matter more closely since Sol isn't a common last name. She consoled mother and father and helped us out a lot.
What's
the relationship between you two? I don't know.
Huh.
I don't know.
I really don't.
Sol Ji-hoo muttered quietly and lowered his head. Sol Woo-sok didn't say anything with how confused Sol Ji-hoo looked to be.
Sol Ji-hoo did not leave Sol Jin-hee's side. He stayed in the hospital room all night and for the next few days. He rarely left the hospital room other than the times he was dragged to the restaurant by his parents and older brother. He knew he had to return to paradise, as Hao Win said, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. He was just too sorry. His younger sister was hurt due to his activities in paradise.
He couldn't raise his head from the guilt. Meanwhile, Hao Win continued to update him on the situation.
The man who shot Sol Jin-hee had died at the scene, and the police were chasing after the mafia members who shot the attacker.
And 4 days later, a new update came in.
Sol Ji-hoo, who was reluctantly eating inside the hospital's restaurant, made a dazed face after seeing the TV screen on the wall. This morning in Incheon Yung-ji-yu, Yerwangdong. It was news that a Mr. Yung was found dead on a hill near Incheon International Airport. He was later told by Hao Win that the Triads and Cecilia were not behind it, and he was already dead when he was found. The media did not connect Yung Min-jong's death with the recent shooting.
With this, the incident seemed to be coming to an end, but Sol Ji-hoo was still in a haze.
Aren't you tired? Today, Sol Ji-hoo was holding onto the hands of his comatose younger sister when he was shaken back to his senses by Yu Sonhwa's voice. You should rest if you're tired.
Isn't your company saying anything? You said you came back in a hurry in the middle of a business trip.
The doctor said she's in a stable state and that she should wake up soon. Hao Win had been suggesting that he go back too. As Hao Win said, there was nothing Sol Ji-hoo could do on Earth.
He didn't think this was a coincidence. Someone who knew about paradise had to be behind it. In that case, the correct thing to do would be to resolve the issue in paradise, where he could exercise his power. For his family.
Yeah, I've been thinking about going back.
Organizing his thoughts, Sol Ji-hoo let go of Sol Jin-hee's hands with difficulty.
That's good.
I was actually worried that Jin-hee might explode if you're the first person she sees after waking up.
Yu Sonhwa said so jokingly, but Sol Ji-hoo didn't laugh.
She let out a dry cough and continued.
Anyway, Uncle Sol and Woo-sok Oppa said they'd come as soon as their work ends, so you should rest up a bit too.
Okay.
Well, if you're that worried, why don't you just quit work?
Sol Ji-hoo chuckled, thinking she was joking. Sonhwa. He got up slowly and then suddenly put on a serious face. Be careful. You be careful too.
Yu Sonhwa stared at Sol Ji-hoo fixedly.
She then laughed and pinched his cheeks.
You're the one who should be careful.
No, I'm not just saying this. I know.
My pipster's worried about me, right?
Hee hee, how kind.
Yu Sonhwa picked up her bag, smiling cheerfully. Let's go.
I will see my pipster off.
Sol Ji-hoo sighed and turned around.
I've always wondered, why do you call me a pipster? It's a mix of pipsqueak and prankster.
Sounds cute, doesn't it?
The man and woman conversed affectionately while leaving the hospital room.
At the same time, Sol Jin-hee's expression waned slightly.
When the sound of the door closing rang out,
her closed eyes opened narrowly.
Sol Jin-hee glanced at the seat that Sol Ji-hoo was sitting on until just a moment ago. She then raised her eyes and stared at the door that opened and closed repeatedly. Sol Ji-hoo finally returned to paradise. He stopped on his way out of the temple.
His dazed face stiffened in an instant, and his eyes shot open.
The rage he had been holding in finally exploded. His family had been targeted. His younger sister was shot.
The image of Sol Jinhee lying unconscious in the hospital bed was still clear in his mind. Sol Ji-hoo almost lost control of himself from the seething rage.
KKEUK.
But he held it in.
No, he tried to.
He knew he shouldn't let his emotions get the better of him, as Hao Win said, but his enemy had touched his reverse scale. Because of me.
Yun Seahui, you motherfucker. No, it's only a conjecture. But it's unlikely that Jung Minjong is the mastermind behind all this.
If it's not Yun Seahui, who could it be?
All sorts of complicated thoughts swirled through his head.
The more they raged, the higher the fire inside him roared. If he weren't calming himself down with clear water, still mirror, he would have flown off with his spear long ago.
Sol Ji-hoo collected his breath and stepped into the street. Since it was dawn and everyone was asleep, the city was eerily silent. The same went for Valhalla's building. Only one person was in the garden, training while sweating profusely with his top off. The man swinging his long, muscular arm and brandishing his chained scythe was none other than Vlad Halep. He always woke up before dawn and trained until daybreak. Zhang Maldong had even given him pointers, rating his diligence highly. Vlad Halep, who was up early like any other day, turned around at a sudden presence. A young man was trudging in from the main entrance. Feeling a strange sense of déjà vu, Vlad Halep observed Sol Ji-hoo carefully. Tightly shut lips, unusually wide eyes, and the whites of the eyes taking up over half of his eyes because of it. He looked like a ghost burning with resentment. While Vlad Halep felt a shiver run down his spine, he finally figured out where the sense of déjà vu was coming from. Looking back, he had seen this side of Sol Ji-hoo once before. In stage 3 of the banquet.
Despite only being a level 3, his terrifying killing intent overwhelmed both him and Oh Rahi, who was a high ranker at the time. Just what could have happened for Sol Ji-hoo to be filled with such killing intent again? Now that I think about it, I heard something happened on Earth. Valhalla's internal atmosphere in recent days had been a bit turbulent. Although Vlad Halep didn't care much about other people's matters, his younger sister, Ona Halep, was rather curious. She told him things she heard from Valhalla's members and even jokingly suggested that they should give a piece of advice as veterans in this field. He does look a little dangerous. Sol Ji-hoo had become far stronger than when he was at the banquet. Incomparably stronger, in fact. Perhaps because of it, his killing intent had gotten stronger by several degrees as well. Though he seemed to be holding himself back, it was obvious that a storm of blood would rage the moment he exploded. What should I do? Vlad Halep hesitated for a moment. Then, after remembering his sister's request, he took a step forward. Hey! Sol Ji-hoo paused once he called out with his rough, deep voice. Can we talk for a bit? Sol Ji-hoo slowly turned his head, his fierce eyes widening in surprise. Vlad Halep gestured toward the building. Let's have a cup of coffee. If you have time, that is. Sol Ji-hoo blinked. Asterisk. Same time. Sol Jinhee placed her hands on her stomach and nodded firmly. I knew it. My body's sturdy. She spoke with satisfaction before turning to look at Yu Sonhwa, who was cutting a peach by her side. You saw it too, right, Uni? The doctor was surprised too. He said this is the first time he's seen a gunshot wound heal so quickly. Yu Sonhwa smiled sweetly without saying anything. And while Sol Jinhee was giggling to herself, she poured a few drops of transparent liquid into Sol Jinhee's drink. Yu Sonhwa then swirled the drink with a straw before handing it to her. Here you go. Drink the whole thing, alright? Okay, Tilda. Sol Jinhee gulped the water down and then opened her mouth wide. Yu Sonhwa smiled bitterly and gave her the plate of cut peaches. Sol Jinhee moaned after taking a bite. Ah, Tilda, it's so good. Are you sure I'm allowed to eat this? I'm sure it is. The doctor said it was okay.
What a sweet peach. Were peaches always this good? Sol Jinhee gobbled the peaches down like a squirrel. Then, those are expensive.
Jihoo bought them.
Patui.
She spat them out after hearing what Yu Sonhwa said.
She coughed as if she was choking on them. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I bought them. Yu Sonhwa apologized and handed her another peach. Sol Jinhee glared at her but happily munched down on it in the next moment. Then, her gobbling slowed down as if she lost her appetite, and she made a bitter face. She even shuddered. Yu Sonhwa laughed in disbelief. You hate him that much? Uni. Sol Jinhee's voice suddenly got low. Do you know what that bastard's been up to lately? That bastard? Knowing who Sol Jinhee was talking about, Yu Sonhwa gave a sidelong glance. He's working at a company. Are you positive? What if his debts finally caught up to him, and he's forced to do dangerous jobs to pay it off? Why are you asking this all of a sudden? Well, I actually woke up a little while ago. You did? But why? At night. Sol Jinhee cut Yu Sonhwa off. I woke up in the middle of night, and that bastard was murmuring something with my hand on his forehead. What was he saying? Whoever you are, motherfucker. I'll kill you and everyone involved. Sol Jinhee smacked her lips. He held my hand every night and murmured to himself endlessly. I almost screamed at first, thinking he was a ghost. Ow, I still get chills thinking about it. Yu Sonhwa feigned a laugh, seeing Sol Jinhee rubbing her arms. Think about it. His precious sister got hurt. It's only natural for him to get angry. Uni, let's not write novels here. Sol Jinhee snorted. This is the same guy who abandoned his precious sister in the middle of a highway. I waited 100 days after that incident. 100 days? Just to be sure. Arg, I'm getting riled up just thinking about it. Sol Jinhee leaned back on the bed, grumbling. Anyway, watch over him and make sure he doesn't do anything stupid. Don't let him run around pointlessly and get shot like me. Oh, so you're worried about him? No, I'm not. Sol Jinhee burst out. Then what? Yu Sonhwa asked teasingly. I'm feeling fantastic right now. The hospital room is comfortable, the food is great, and I saw a cute, short-haired nurse with milky white skin and also an incredibly handsome oppa. If that bastard gets shot, he'll experience this bliss too, and I don't want that to happen. No way, this isn't a place anyone can enter, you know. I'm telling the truth. Ah, right, an incredibly handsome oppa stayed by your side every night and held your hands. You must be delighted. Awk. Sol Jinhee grabbed the pillow by her head. Leave, Uni. She threw it at the giggling Yu Sonhwa and then pulled the blanket up to her head. 1. Dragons have one scale growing in the opposite direction to all the others. Touching this reverse scale is said to enrage the dragon. Touching the reverse scale means to offend the emperor or a man in power. Chapter 412. Trrrr. Following the sound of pouring water, a fragrant scent of coffee wafted out. Vlad Halep poured water into a large cup before half-heartedly swirling it with a spoon and holding up a long stick of butter. He cut the stick with his side, dropping it into the cup, and then handing it over Sol Jihoo. Sol Jihoo carefully held the hot cup in his hands. Drink. It'll warm your body up a bit. Vlad Halep said stiffly before plopping down on a seat across from Sol Jihoo and gulping down another cup of coffee he made for himself. Sol Jihoo stared at the yellow butter melting in his coffee with a somewhat surprised look. After taking a sip, his eyes widened. The coffee's bitter flavor and the butter's softness mixed together and smoothly flowed down his throat. It's good. His stiff expression loosened slightly. I've never had coffee with butter before. That's how people usually drink coffee in my hometown. Vlad Halep replied after taking the coffee cup off his lips. It's the best way to warm yourself up when it's cold. He then sipped down the coffee again. Sol Jihu was growing anxious, but he waited patiently. He could tell Vlad Halep was thinking about how to bring up the topic.
In Sol Jihu's eyes, Vlad Halep was a cold person by nature, who didn't care much about other people's matters. Someone like him had asked to talk, so Sol Jihu figured there was a reason for it. By any chance? Just as Sol Jihu thought so, Vlad Halep spoke.
Do you remember what I told you before? At Oder's Inn. Oder's Inn.
You mean the reason you and your sister entered paradise?
No, not that.
That's what Ona said, not me.
Vlad Halep shook his head.
Sol Jihu searched through his memories.
He then remembered the few lines that Vlad Halep had said then. Please protect us. I'm asking if you can protect me and my little sister with your strength. Without asking anything. No. We aren't criminals. I know it sounds strange, but we don't know who they are exactly. We can't even figure out what they want from us. All we know is that there are people in this world who do not like us and that they are making things inconvenient for us.
Sol Jihu did a double take. He planned to talk to the Halep siblings properly once the Tigil Fortress War ended, but because of the trials and a slew of other things, he had forgotten about it completely. To be honest, I don't know if this is something I should tell you. Vlad Halep started. I have no proof or a way to be sure. But, it's true that Ona's and my life changed from entering Valhalla, and there have been things I've come to realize because of it. Sol Jihu nodded his head as if having proof did not matter. My younger sister and I entered paradise with a red stamp. Yes, Ona mentioned you guys falling into poverty because of the lustful spirit and being introduced to paradise by an acquaintance.
Acquaintance?
Vlad Halep snorted. That's not exactly wrong, I guess. A creditor is still an acquaintance. It seemed like it wasn't the case that the siblings' inviter found them pitiful and gave them an opportunity. He had an ulterior motive, that damned guy. Ulterior motive? We knew that people with red marks were treated like slaves in paradise. It's understandable that they serve as meat shields or baits. But that doesn't mean becoming an outlet for his sexual desire. An outlet? I'm talking about Ona. Vlad Halep spoke calmly, but his expression turned fierce as if he was recalling the past. I only found out later, but Ona had been getting offers from that guy for a long time. For example, writing off a certain amount of debt every time she let him have his way with her. Sol Jihu's eyes narrowed. Enticing a debtor into selling her body wasn't an uncommon thing, but it was undoubtedly an unpleasant thing to recall and to hear. He must have been eyeing for an opportunity ever since he made her enter paradise. You mean? I killed him before he could do anything though. Vlad Halep sluggishly moved his fingers on the coffee cup. I had given Ona a communication crystal to use between the two of us. She cleverly let me know their location while pretending to talk to him casually, so I ran there and ripped him apart on the spot. Good job. Well. Vlad Halep's gradually rising voice sunk low in an instant. I didn't think I did a good job. Not until a year ago. Sol Jihu's eyes widened at his confession. Ona regretted it from time to time, saying things like, maybe it would have been better for my family if I just accepted it. Talk. Vlad Halep slammed down the coffee cup with a sigh. Because. He then said. That's when everything began. What do you mean? It's when they started going after us. Vlad Halep continued. They didn't even stop to think about why we killed their inviter. They killed our comrade, so we have to get revenge. That's what they seemed to be thinking. There was no safe place for us. Whenever we went outside, we would have a group of people start tailing us, and it was the same inside cities. Because we were attacked so often at inns, a rumor started spreading, and innkeepers started to chase us out, saying we were obstructing their businesses. We were getting desperate. We wanted to fight back. But there was just no end to them. Ona almost died on 3 different occasions. Every day was like a living hell. Things were getting so bad that we participated in the banquet knowing the risks.
Quote, Sol Ji-hoo raised his eyes while silently listening to his story.
Speaking of the banquet, he remembered how, at the end of stage 1, Vlad Halep trudged up the staircase covered in blood.
We figured we might be able to escape from them during the banquet, maybe even finding a solution to our problem. I didn't expect some of the people in my room to bare their fangs while I was agitated from being separated from my sister. They just didn't give up, huh? Yep.
Their tenacity was baffling considering killing one insignificant member started it all.
Vlad Halep snorted. The problem was that it wasn't just in paradise that this happened.
Sol Ji-hoo furrowed his rose.
They viciously came after us on Earth too. They didn't just target us, but also our family. For the record, our parents passed away from a car accident.
The police said it was an unfortunate accident, but Ona and I don't think so. Sol Ji-hoo gasped unknowingly. Sung Shi-hyun, was it? Maybe I shouldn't be saying this to you, but I can understand why he defected. Vlad Halep continued with slightly rough breaths.
I hear the suppression he faced wasn't small. I can't help but feel sympathy for the guy. There was no place for Ona and me in both paradise and Earth. I suppose it was the same for him. No place. Sol Ji-hoo reiterated the phrase in his head as it resonated with him strongly.
Then, he shook his head.
He finally understood why he couldn't hear from the Halep siblings for a while after going back to Earth. It's a shame that your parents passed away. I almost exploded when it happened.
Ona was also shot and was in danger of dying.
I was already on the brink of going crazy, and I almost went blind from rage.
With
the situation being how it was, I even thought about turning to the parasites.
You considered defecting?
Yes. It wasn't just a momentary thing either. I considered it seriously. I talked to Ona about it once too.
We had nothing left on Earth, and since it looked like we were going to die anyway, I suggested turning to the parasites and becoming one of them. Because successfully becoming a parasite would mean they would no longer have to worry about dying. Because he would be able to save his younger sister.
Because he would be able to kill his enemies. If it weren't for Ona. She must have stopped you. Yes. She pleaded with me not to, saying that a day would come when things would get better. She told me not to lose, saying that defecting was equivalent to losing.
Not to lose? Sol Ji-hoo tilted his head. So I told her I'd try to bear with it a little more. But I wasn't really hopeful. Vlad Halep trailed off and then glanced at Sol Ji-hoo.
Coincidentally, the pursuit died down not long afterward.
To be more precise, it was when you started to make a name for yourself.
Sol Ji-hoo blinked at the sudden mention of his name. It's not like it disappeared completely, but it lessened significantly compared to the past. And
Vlad Halep paused and waited a bit before continuing.
The attack against us stopped completely after the Tigil Fortress War. Out of the blue.
Then, he grinned. It's ironic, isn't it? Choosing to enter Valhalla was a trivial decision, but it actually granted the one thing we've been wanting for so long.
But you know.
Vlad Halep stopped, stiffened his expression, and looked straight at Sol Ji-hoo. Once I regained some semblance of peace, I couldn't help but think how strange it was. It didn't seem so at the time, but the more time I had to look back on things, the more I thought it was strange. What do you mean? Believe it or not, I've had keen senses ever since I was a kid.
In a different way compared to my sister. I guess you can say I react sensitively to killing intent. Sol Ji-hoo swallowed the thought. Isn't that because you were born with the fate of heaven slaughtering star?
Here's the strange thing. These people murdered my parents disguising it as an accident. They almost killed Ona several times, but I never once felt killing intent directed at me. It was as if they were trying to drive Vlad Halep to a solitude without killing him.
And when you appeared, the attack that's been going on for years suddenly stopped.
It was as if the large, mysterious enemy that was trying to seize control over him stopped and turned its attention to Sol Ji-hoo.
Looking back, I can't help but think that they were trying to drive me to a corner.
And once I started thinking that way, I began to understand why Ona told me not to lose.
You have a wise sister. Sol Ji-hoo grew curious as well.
What if his younger sister was in paradise?
What would Sol Jinhee have said? Anyway.
Vlad Halep thought for a moment before clearing his throat. What I'm trying to tell you is this. Don't get swayed. Don't get swayed.
When things like this happen, it's natural to get emotionally charged. Right. If I had given in to my feelings back then, I might have become a parasite and stood against you as an enemy.
If that happened, I wouldn't have been able to enjoy the happiness I have now. Vlad Halep made an awkward face as if he was embarrassed to say the word, happiness. By now, Sol Ji-hoo had calmed down significantly.
What Vlad Halep was suggesting played a big part.
Thinking about it, he and Vlad Halep had a few things in common. Being involved in many incidents and accidents, being targeted by a mysterious enemy, and so on.
In this sense, Vlad Halep was his senior.
That wasn't all. Sol Ji-hoo felt the same strangeness at Vlad Halep's story, and it was something he had felt before too when he read the records Ian wrote about renowned earthlings who met unfortunate ends.
Once he thought this far, his head cleared up. Thank you.
Sol Ji-hoo bowed politely. His heart had been charred black with rage on his way to the building, but thanks to Vlad Halep, his reason came back, his head cooling down. Vlad Halep stared at Sol Ji-hoo expressing his gratitude before looking away and sipping on his coffee.
Well,
let me know if there's anything I can help with.
It's hard to deny that Ona and I are benefiting from Valhalla's protection.
Only then did a thin smile surface on Sol Ji-hoo's face. Vlad Halep could easily have said he wanted to repay Valhalla for its help, but he said so in such an odd, roundabout way.
It seemed that's how he was by nature. Sol Ji-hoo thought for a moment before asking.
By the way, how is it living here?
I told you. I'm hap. It's good.
What does Ona think?
She said she's happy to be around lots of big-breasted older sisters.
Come again? Don't look at me like that.
I'm saying exactly what she said. Well, alright. Anyway.
Sol Ji-hoo said with a bland laugh.
I've been meaning to ask for a while.
But how about you and Ona quit being guests and become official members?
Vlad Halep raised his eyebrow.
To tell you the truth.
He stared at Sol Ji-hoo as the corners of his mouth curled up.
I was wondering when you were going to ask.
Great.
Sol Ji-hoo raised his coffee cup at Vlad Halep's refreshing answer.
I'm looking forward to working with you. Sure, as long as our promise holds. Vlad Halep held his coffee cup out. Clang.
After a light toast, Sol Ji-hoo brought the cup to his mouth, tilting it slightly.
The coffee was very hot and flavorful. Asterisk.
Sol Ji-hoo and Vlad Halep signed the contract on the spot. Vlad Halep dragged his half-asleep sister out of bed, and the two of them became official members of Valhalla. Then, Sol Ji-hoo summoned Yuri once morning came. There was something he realized after talking with Vlad Halep. Right. Though paradise might be a world where the fist was stronger than the law, he was still the agent of his actions. To not be manipulated by others, he had to put his reason ahead of his emotions. And so, Sol Ji-hoo called Yuri, who was one of the most rational people he knew.
Did you call? Yuri staggered in after knocking on the office door. Her hair was wet, perhaps having left the shower just now.
Judging by her bloodshot eyes and severe fatigue that was written all over her face, she must have pulled another all-nighter.
Are you all right? You look exhausted. I'm okay. It's just that teacher keeps giving me difficult homework. I'm in the middle of learning construct magic, but she wants me to define the degree of chaos following expansion and compression using the number of microstates, which directly corresponds with macrostates, then combine the increase, propensity, and state of entropy with probability theory and explain it to her.
What a clusterfuck. Sol Ji-hoo doubted his ears while Eun Yuri did a double take. Ah. Forget what I just said.
I feel like you're becoming more and more like Lady Russell.
The other two will be devastated when they find out I got a separate, higher difficulty homework.
I'm sure they'll chew me out behind my back.
That's what she wanted me to forget. Sol Ji-hoo stared at Eun Yuri with a bad aftertaste.
Eun Yuri pushed back her wet hair and stretched out her arms. Anyway, why did you call me?
You seem tired. How about solving a mystery to freshen up? A mystery?
Eun Yuri's drowsy eyes lit up.
Then, she stared at Sol Ji-hoo suspiciously.
I don't mind, but is the reward a silver plate and a glass cup?
If it is, I'm leaving for real.
No.
Sol Ji-hoo smiled bitterly.
I actually want Miss Eun Yuri's advice with regard to what's been happening recently. Eun Yuri fixed her posture, realizing that Sol Ji-hoo wasn't joking around.
Her lax eyes sharpened in an instant as she nodded her head.
Let's see.
Eun Yuri was a genius.
Of course, she was only a genius in terms of her talent in magic. She wasn't a tactician rivaling Zhuge Liang nor a detective rivaling Sherlock Holmes.
However, Sol Ji-hoo knew she had unusually sharp discerning eyes. Though she did not get the answer right in the special tutorial, she had still provided a way forward that Sol Ji-hoo did not think of. Sol Ji-hoo wasn't expecting Eun Yuri to solve all his issues, but he was at a stage where he had to clutch at every straw.
And so, Sol Ji-hoo decided to seek advice from his surroundings, borrowing the help of a female college student who was majoring in modern dance.
Where do I begin? Sol Ji-hoo pondered before starting with the slandering incident when he was in Harem and ending with his younger sister recently being shot on Earth. He didn't leave out a single detail. Despite how long it took to recount the whole story, Eun Yuri did not lose focus until the end.
This. She spoke as soon as the story ended. This isn't a mystery, it's a Neapolitan.
Neapolitan?
Yep.
Have you heard of the story of the red billiard ball?
I think so, on the internet.
It's a story without a correct answer so that anyone's imagination can become the answer as long as it sounds plausible.
Eun Yuri stuck out her tongue and looked up.
Judging by the way she was rolling her eyes left and right, she seemed to be in deep thought. Though Sol Ji-hoo didn't understand why she was licking her lips with her tongue so quickly, he remained silent and waited patiently.
It sounds complicated at first glance, but… Eun Yuri murmured to herself. Oppa.
Before she stared at Sol Ji-hoo and asked, "How much do you trust Gyula Nim?"
It was a rather unexpected question.
What do you mean?
I'm just asking.
Do you trust Gyula Nim?
Yes, I do.
Then does Gyula Nim trust you? Do you guys think of yourselves as definite allies?
Probably.
Sol Ji-hoo nodded his head.
Indeed, since Gyula Nim is going against the Parasite Queen and seems to adore Oppa a lot too. I'm sure there's a reason she said what she did. You can really think of it as a hint. Eun Yuri nodded strongly. She then raised her index finger and middle finger, pointing them at Sol Ji-hoo. 1. Zhuge Liang was a Chinese politician, military strategist, writer, engineer, and inventor. If interested, feel free to Google. Chapter 413. The reason you are so confused is that many events are intertwined like spiderwebs. It was true. A lot had happened in a short period of time.
The complexity of the situation suggests that many people are after you.
Anyway, the situation surrounding you can be classified into two categories. Eun Yuri continued with her fingers still up.
The first category is Sinyoung. The assault incident has already been settled, and the incident on Earth has been concluded with the discovery of Jung Minjong's body.
But… Eun Yuri cleared her throat. It feels too hasty to assume that everything has been handled. I'm sure you're wondering what role Yun Seahui played in the said events. Eun Yuri pinpointed Sol Ji-hoo's innermost thoughts. Did Yun Seahui plan the assault?
Did she really not know about it?
Or did she know, but chose not to stop it? These questions lingered on Sol Ji-hoo's mind.
If he had the ability to read minds, he would most definitely have read Yun Seohui's.
I see why you and Hana Uni forced Yun Seohui to resign. She's impossible to read, so it's safest to limit her influence as much as possible.
Sol Ji-hoo nodded quietly.
Honestly, I don't get Yun Seohui either. Eun Yuri remarked, tilting her head slightly to one side. She's a mystery. There's one case I believe Yun Seohui could be the culprit, but for my assumption to be true, she has to have the mind of a 5-year-old. Sol Ji-hoo gave a light chuckle. I wouldn't have cared about Miss Yun Seohui in the first place if she were that young.
Don't you know?
Sometimes kids can be scarier than adults. Eun Yuri refuted and then lowered a finger. Children usually don't have a sense of right or wrong as developed as adults do. Recalling the time when his brother threw his bike off the balcony of their third-floor apartment because he was bored, Sol Ji-hoo gave a small nod of agreement. Then he shifted his gaze back to Eun Yuri. She still had one finger up. The second category is the trial to become the apostle of gluttony. You completed your plan by bringing down Sinyoung but nonetheless failed to pass the trial. Because there still is a problem that hasn't been dealt with. That's what Gula-nim said, right? Well, yes. Sol Ji-hoo listened to her attentively before suddenly speaking up. Why did you divide these events into 2 categories? He asked, tilting his head. I think we should group these 2 incidents together. You're right, they do have something in common. These incidents both began with the Valhalla assault incident. Eun Yuri nodded and then opened her eyes wide.
But technically, the assault was only the beginning of everything that followed.
I think what happened after the incident should be regarded as 2 separate events.
Why?
Because. Eun Yuri's voice thinned, and after a moment of silence, she shrugged her shoulders. I think that's what Gula-nim was hinting at. Sol Ji-hoo looked more confused. Eun Yuri stared at him with her signature nonchalant eyes and gave a mysterious smile.
You're an engineering major, right?
Yes. I think sometimes you just think too hard. When you solve a problem, you expect each step to be logical and precise, like math. Eun Yuri let out a muffled laughter and slowly got up. I don't mean it's bad, but I'm not exactly at the age to be giving life advice to others, but in my experience, sometimes illogical and abnormal events happen in life. Especially when it comes to feelings and words. She walked lightly past the desk and arrived next to Sol Ji-hoo. Eun Yuri stared down at Sol Ji-hoo as he stared up at her.
The two stared at each other for a while before Eun Yuri gave a small sigh and rushed at Sol Ji-hoo, wriggling her hips into the chair that he was sitting in. Miss Eun Yuri? Come on, scooch over.
All right. Eun Yuri successfully took over half of the chair and smiled triumphantly.
Then she grabbed a piece of paper on the desk and picked up a pen.
I'll try to simplify it for you, Mr. Engineer. She pulled the paper close and her hand began to move. She wrote the words, Sinyoung, and trial, across the white paper in elegant handwriting. Gula-nim's words were about the trial. Eun Yuri tapped the word, trial, with the tip of her pen and drew an equal sign, smiley face, next to it. Lead humanity's change. Humanity still bears a grave problem, and because of that, the change is not complete. Okay, so let's first define what humanity is. Who does humanity include in paradise? Eun Yuri spoke like a teacher addressing a class.
Sol Ji-hoo answered almost immediately.
Earthlings. That's right, Earthlings are one of them.
And the other? The other?
The other.
Paradisians?
Correct. Which means. Eun Yuri paused and wrote down the words, Paradisians, and Earthlings, next to the equal sign. To lead humanity's change means to lead both the Paradisians and Earthlings' change. Next. Eun Yuri continued. From here on out, I'll approach the problem with reverse calculation and the process of elimination. Reverse calculation? It's not hard.
It's actually very simple.
It's what we do when we solve critical reading problems.
When we don't know what the answer is just by reading the passage, we start by eliminating the least likely answer from the choices we're given.
Yuri spun the pen once in her hand and then started writing again. Humanity equals paradisians and earthlings.
The reason why the trial isn't complete equals because humanity's change isn't complete. The reason why humanity's change isn't complete equals because humanity has a serious problem.
Yuri placed parentheses around the word, humanity, in the last sentence. What happens if you replace this word with the one defined earlier?
Because paradisians and earthlings have a serious problem.
Ah! Sol Jihu suddenly came to a revelation. Yuri smiled softly.
Didn't Gyula Nim say something else?
Those who have changed are only a fraction of the total. I acknowledge that you have forcefully changed earthlings to some extent. Yuri finished his sentence and drew a diagonal line over the word, earthlings. All that was left now was, paradisians.
This is where Gyula Nim gave you an important hint.
Yuri turned her head to Sol Jihu. You were close in terms of physical distance. Quote. Which paradisians have you talked to in the last few months? Quote. Charlotte Arya, Sorg Kun, Ro Scheherazade, and the attendant who came to see us just before we left Scheherazade. That's not that many. Do you think Charlotte and the royal administrator are traitors?
Sol Jihu shook his head. That leaves us with 2 people.
Ro Scheherazade and her attendant. Yuri jabbed the word, paradisians, with her pen point and finished her explanation. The end. Yuri came up with a solution so easily to the problem Sol Jihu had spent days trying to solve.
Sol Jihu stared down at the paper.
It wasn't like he had nothing to say. Miss Yuri. But.
I know what you're thinking.
Yuri interrupted him as if she already knew what he was about to say.
To some extent, means, not entirely.
So why did she take earthlings out of the equation so hastily?
And, about the paradisans, we don't know the exact range of the physical distance, so why?
Right? Yuri threw a glance at him.
Sol Jihu closed his mouth.
And this is my answer to your question.
You're right, earthlings may not have changed completely.
The contract is only the start, after all.
But, to be precise, earthlings' change is still a work in progress. Just like how Sinyoung is in the process of fulfilling its commitments. Basically, she was saying that the success of the plan would have to be judged later because the results had not yet come out.
And about the physical distance.
You're right again.
We don't know the exact range. So let's assume that a random civilian you've passed on the street is in fact a traitor. What can that civilian even do? I don't think the parasite queen would coax a human who has absolutely no influence in paradise unless she's gone nuts. And the word, close, means a short distance away. Isn't Scheherazade, besides Eva, the only city you've recently visited?
She was right.
According to the records Ian wrote, the parasite queen only showed interest in humans who could be useful to her. And of all the paradisians Sol Jihu recently came in contact with, only a few met that standard. Yuri let out a small sigh. Like I said, sometimes you think too hard. I understand why.
Our enemies are strong, so you have trained yourself to consider all possibilities and prepare in advance.
But I think you should think intuitively this time. Because Gyula Nim and you are linked by a strong trust. Protecting the world from the parasite queen was the duty of the 7 sins. If they were to fail in their mission, they would undoubtedly get devoured like the 7 virtues. Because their own existence was at stake, they had every reason to help Sol Jihu fight the parasite queen. One thing I learned while studying magic under teacher is that words have mystical powers. Yuri stared calmly at Sol Jihu.
A soft answer turns away wrath. Sometimes the same word changes meaning depending on the context.
You say one thing, and others will interpret it in hundreds of different ways. For example, take responsibility could be interpreted in many ways. It could be a marriage proposal, a reminder to fulfill one's duty, or something entirely different. I'm sure that not only Gula Nim but also the rest of the 7 sins are eagerly waiting for you to pass the trial.
So isn't it likely that she gave you a hint, hoping you would notice while avoiding affecting the law of causality as much as possible?
Sol Jihu closed his eyes in deep thought. Un Yuri stared at him for a while before carefully speaking. And, more importantly,
did you not feel it?
When we were leaving Scheherazade. I had a bad feeling then.
Sol Jihu flinched.
He remembered it as well. On their way back, he felt nervous for no particular reason and uncomfortable even after he returned. Like something bad was about to happen in Scheherazade.
Who knew Un Yuri, who had an aptitude for ESP, felt the same way?
At the time I thought I was just imagining things, but talking to you reminded me how I felt that day. Sol Jihu became more and more convinced that Un Yuri was right.
Anyway, I won't say I'm right.
But I think it's worth giving it a shot.
While trying, you may come across new clues, and even if that's not the case, it'll definitely narrow down the possibilities. At this point, Sol Jihu could no longer find a reason to dispute. The fact was that he felt Un Yuri was right. In retrospect, it wasn't just the fact that his innate ability didn't work on her that was strange about Rose Scheherazade.
Are you not going to destroy Sinyoung? It must have been that child. Even though we've been close friends since we were kids. It's not just the Earthlings. What she said. He thought she was referring to the attendant who betrayed her, but…
After sorting out his thoughts, Sol Jihu slowly opened his eyes.
The view had opened out before him. It was a great choice for him to talk to Un Yuri. She didn't say the answer, but she taught him the direction in which to move forward from where he was stagnant.
Sol Jihu spoke with a nod.
I understand what you're trying to say. We'll have to investigate Rose Scheherazade and her attendant first. That won't be hard. All you have to do is leave a trace of teacher's mana on them. Your flirting skills will make it easy. Un Yuri smiled, and… Or, if you're still worried, we could narrow down the suspects further.
She said in a secretive voice.
Sol Jihu's eyes opened wide. How? Through variables.
Variables?
You know,
like a calculator that can calculate an extremely complex mathematical problem in the blink of an eye.
I didn't know I had something like that. Sol Jihu tilted his head in question. Of course you do.
But its effect will vary depending on how you use it.
Un Yuri suddenly paused and turned her gaze to the door.
Sol Jihu did the same.
Thumping footsteps echoed from the hallway and the door burst open.
Hey, you here? The person who had come into his office was none other than Cho Hong. She glanced about the office and stopped when she saw the pair of man and woman glued to each other in the same chair.
Were you guys having fun? She asked, slowly lifting one of her eyebrows. No. Not at all. No. Not at all. The pair denied simultaneously and looked at each other. Cho Hong snorted. Like hell, you're not. Since when did you two become an item?
I thought you didn't like it small? Small?
Un Yuri blinked in confusion and suddenly flinched.
Then she quickly covered her chest with her arms and glared at Cho Hong.
What's going on? You didn't even knock.
Ah. It's just that you have some guests.
Cho Hong gestured behind her with her thumb.
Guests?
Yeah. Miss Foxy has them now. I tried to wait until you were done here, but you were taking way too long. She asked me to tell you to come quickly if you aren't too busy.
Guests, at this time of the year? Who are they?
Curious, Sol Jihu turned to Un Yuri.
But of course, Un Yuri didn't know any better.
Anyway, if you're not busy, you should go greet them. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you can have sex anytime. Cho Hong remarked bluntly when she saw the pair exchange a look.
Sol Ji-hoo and Eun Yuri quickly jumped out of the chair and pulled away from each other in opposite directions.
Asterisk.
He was told that Kim Hana took the guests to the cafeteria on the 10th floor.
She seemed to have treated them to a meal while he was talking to Eun Yuri.
He didn't have a clue as to who these guests might be, so he asked Cho Hong about them only to be given an unsatisfactory answer.
I don't know.
What? Don't ask me.
I ran into them by sheer coincidence when I went to the cafeteria to eat. Miss Foxy saw me, and she asked me to bring you immediately.
Cho Hong said a slightly discontented voice. This would mean that Kim Hana decided it was best to keep the guest's visit secret.
Sol Ji-hoo quickly climbed the stairs, and as he arrived at the cafeteria, his eyes widened.
He saw Kim Hana waiting for him, leaning against the wall, Seo Yu-hui walking out of the kitchen with a tray in her hand, and two shabby-looking men sitting at a table hurriedly pushing a spoonful of the rice soup into their mouths.
There's more. Eat up. Tea, thank you.
Seo Yu-hui handed them an extra bowl of rice and soup, and one of them took the bowl with both hands and put it on the table. The speed at which they were eating was incredibly fast, like they'd been starving for days.
I feel like I've seen them somewhere before.
He watched the two men eat when suddenly one of them took off his hood, which had covered most of his face because it got in the way of him eating. The man stuffed rice into his mouth to the point where one of his cheeks bulged out, grabbed radish kimchi by hand, and took a big bite.
Sol Ji-hoo's eyes widened. Ah! The man heard that sound and stopped.
He turned to Sol Ji-hoo, standing near the entrance of the cafeteria, and stood up from his seat with a hiccup. Why, you're here? Stuttering, he quickly tapped his friend, who was still busy shoveling food into his mouth.
Huh. Those guys. Cho Hong also remembered them. Aren't you those bastards from before?
Are you crazy? Who do you think you are, showing up here like nothing happened?
She rolled up her sleeves and was about to jump at them but suddenly stopped.
Sol Ji-hoo was pulling her arm. His grip was so strong that her arm was almost sore.
Ow! Hey! Hey! I get it. I'll stop. Cho Hong grumbled and Sol Ji-hoo loosened his grip. He turned his eyes to the two men as they carefully rose from their seats. When their eyes met, the two lowered their heads in a hurry. It's been a while.
Sol Ji-hoo spoke quietly. Mr. Pavlovici. Am I correct?
Why, yes.
The guests were none other than the Pavlovici brothers who had picked a fight with Sol Ji-hoo at a pub in Harem.
There were 4 of them back then, but now there were only 2.
This is a surprise.
I didn't know you'd come. Back then.
Pavlovici wiped his mouth with his sleeve and swallowed what was in his mouth. Then he continued.
I made a promise to you, the representative of Carpe Diem. I mean, Valhalla. He spoke carefully, surveying the look on Sol Ji-hoo's face.
I'm here to keep that promise. Sol Ji-hoo's eyes slowly scanned the man, who clearly seemed nervous.
Pavlovici's promise. Please, HWEP us.
We arranged by Soe.
We'll do ash you shay. Please HWEP us. Please. We'll pay way back this debt BWIG. Please, we'll pay back this debt big. I spared your lives back then. Sol Ji-hoo spoke, stroking his chin. If you've come to keep your word, does that mean you've come to save my life? Pavlovici hesitated briefly before shaking his head. Honestly, I don't know if this has anything to do with your life. And then, however, with a serious expression, I've brought you the news that's just as big. He spoke in a careful yet confident voice. Sol Ji-hoo raised his chin and took a quick breath. He turned his gaze to Eun Yuri, who had followed him to the cafeteria. A variable had occurred. A variable that he did not expect and the enemy could not have known either. A variable that, as she said, could shorten the process of reaching the answer. Chapter 414. The Pavlovici brothers came to visit. Their goal,
to repay the debt of Valhalla, sparing and even saving their lives. Judging by the way they were talking, they seemed to have a rather important piece of information. Sol Jihu strongly wanted to ask them about everything they knew, but he held himself back, seeing the state that Pavlovici and his brother were in. They were practically shoving food down their throats while their faces were covered in filth. If Sol Jihu didn't know any better, he would have confused them for beggars.
It was obvious what kind of life they had been living since the last time they saw each other. And so, Sol Jihu offered to wait until they finished eating, and only afterward did he take them to the reception room. Pavlovici seemed to have calmed down a bit after stuffing himself.
To be honest, I'm not a good talker.
Pavlovici started while smoking a cigarette that Sol Jihu gave him.
So I plan to recount everything I went through. Is that okay? Sol Jihu nodded.
That seemed better than Pavlovici adding unnecessary commentary and explanation. Understood. Now, where should I begin? Pavlovici twiddled his thumbs for a bit.
After that incident, we brothers had to be on the run for a long time. And then quietly began his narration.
It was extremely exhausting at first. We pretty much lived like cavemen. And since we didn't know when our pursuers would catch up to us, we had to erase our tracks carefully and search for new hideouts periodically. Cho-hong glared while swinging her crossed legs. She looked like she had no interest in hearing about the Pavlovici brothers' hardships.
Anyway, we got used to living outside as time passed by. We considered going into the city every once in a while, but we gave up on the idea after what happened in Harem.
Pavlovici spoke quickly. And Earth wasn't a safe place for us either. We bore with it, thinking of it as rightful punishment until we suddenly got a call.
A call?
Yes. We were told that Cecilia would seek us out and that we should follow them obediently.
Pavlovici's eyes headed to Kim Hannah.
Thanks to her help, we were able to secure our safety under Cecilia's protection. In paradise and on Earth.
Pavlovici bowed and expressed his gratitude.
Kim Hannah was expressionless. Sol Jihu had not heard of this before, but he remained focused on hearing Pavlovici out. Once we settled down, we focused on doing the job we were tasked with. The first thing was to make a dead man and a missing man.
Sol Jihu's eyes narrowed. The Pavlovicis were originally a group of 4 brothers.
However, only 2 came today. In other words, the other 2.
Creating the performance wasn't hard.
We had been living outside for a long time, and most people had forgotten about us. Pavlovici rubbed his cigarette on the ashtray before continuing. 2 of my brothers were getting sick and tired of paradise anyway. I sent them back to Earth in the middle of the night.
They have not entered paradise since. They should be living in a safe hideout provided by Cecilia now. And after that, my brother, who is here with me right now, and I separated and went to different cities.
I assumed charge in Scheherazade,
and he wandered through the other 6 cities.
So you guys showed yourselves?
Yes.
Since when?
Be precise. We acted like beggars at first.
It wasn't until the Valhalla attack incident that we started to move openly. Sol Jihu sent a gaze asking for more explanation. Well, we didn't do much, just spreading Valhalla's shocking ventures day in and day out. The Queen of Eva's announcement probably was the highlight of my career, if you could call it that. Pavlovici paused to observe Sol Jihu. I mixed in with the Earthlings, and cursed Representative Sol.
What was that?
I just did as I was told. When Cho-hong blurted out fiercely, Pavlovici hurriedly waved his hand in denial.
Anyway, the Earthlings were furious at the time, so it wasn't anything difficult. What did you say specifically?
Sol Jihu pacified Cho-hong, who was throwing a fit, and then asked. I talked about the Haramark incident, pretended to be drunk, and stealthily mentioned how 2 of my brothers vanished into thin air and said how I separated from my remaining brother in fear. Sometimes I caused a scene at the pub on purpose until the guards came and arrested me. In other words, he had mixed into the public eye stealthily and revealed his existence without going overboard.
Just like that, I continued living like an alcoholic beggar.
Now, this thing. It must have happened a few days after Representative Seoul forced Sinyoung to their knees. He finally got to the main point. Seoul Ji-hoo leaned forward unwittingly. I was sleeping on the streets that day after lamenting my misfortunes at the pub when this person came to see me.
Who?
She was covered in a robe from head to toe, so I couldn't see her face.
But judging by her thin, high-toned voice, she had to have been a woman. What did she say?
She asked if I was Pavlovici and then mentioned the Harem incident. Pavlovici's eyes slowly headed to the building outside as if to reminisce about the past. Asterisk. I heard there used to be 4 of you.
Why don't I see the other 3? Pavlovici, who was sprawled on the ground drunk, looked up at the hooded woman who was looking around his surroundings.
Coming to see him before sunrise and asking about his brother's whereabouts.
Pavlovici felt suspicion rising from the depth of his heart.
I
don't know.
Pavlovici twisted his tongue and pretended to be drunk. One's dead, one disappeared. I don't know where the last is. You he 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 he.
He dropped his head, letting out a voice which made it hard to tell whether he was laughing or crying.
Oh,
what a shame. A monotonous voice rang out above him.
You guys disappeared after the Harem incident.
Just what happened to you all?
In that instant, Pavlovici felt the effects of alcohol escaping his behind. It was because he remembered what Kim Hannah told him strongly. What you guys need the most is the justification for living in hiding for years.
Don't ask any questions. Don't try to pry anything out.
All you have to do is act like a deadbeat, who's constantly living in fear. Pavlovici slowly raised his head.
What happened to us? Hee. Are you asking because you really don't know? What's wrong?
I don't know the details, but didn't Valhalla's representative generously spare you all?
What? Generous?
You ha 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 ha. Pavlovici guffawed loudly.
He smashed our arms with a mace, made us suffer through all kinds of torture, and even ordered Cecilia to prevent us from returning to Earth.
Is that something a generous person would do?
I only went on a drunken rant at a pub.
It's not like I was spreading lies. Pavlovici raised his voice while gasping for breath.
You want to say they spared us? You want to know something?
It was all for a selfish reason.
He said killing us wouldn't reflect well on his image, so he sent us off after having us treated by a priest. We won't kill you right away, he said.
What a frightening guy. If I suddenly disappear or appear as a corpse, you'll know who was behind it. He won't kill me carelessly though, since he cares about his image so much. He. So what you're saying is?
A thin voice flowed out. Valhalla will find you and kill you once enough time passes and people forget about the past incident. He. You have no idea how many times we've had people tail us.
Pavlovici furrowed his brows all of a sudden. He finally revealed a doubtful face.
Come to think of it.
Who are you?
Don't worry, I'm just a passerby. Anyway, am I correct? I don't know. Pavlovici backtracked on his butt with his face pale in fear. Oh. What's wrong all of a sudden?
I am not saying Valhalla did that. It's just that my brothers are gone. I might be mistaken, or it might be something else entirely.
Though the hood covering the woman's face made it hard to see, Pavlovici could feel a gaze observing him carefully amidst his drivel.
When he rushed up in a hurry, turned around, and pretended to run off.
Don't you want to get revenge?
The mysterious woman's words stopped him. Don't you want to know what happened to your brothers and who was behind it?
What? Actually, I'm sure you already know. You are here, like this, because you're too scared and weak to do anything about it.
Who are you? I was a simple passerby a moment ago. But now I guess you can say I'm someone who shares your interests.
Then, as if she had nothing further to say, the woman slowly raised her left arm, rummaged through her pocket with her right hand, and took out a piece of paper.
Then, she slowly put it on the ground. This is a map.
A map?
Not long ago, I found a ruin hidden deep inside this city. If you're interested.
There is a ruin in Scheherazade?
Are you playing with me? You're free to believe it or not. I only found out by chance. It wasn't discovered until now only because it's inside the Scheherazade royal palace.
Inside the royal palace. Pavlovich's expression gradually contorted into a frown.
Mad. You're absolutely mad.
You want me to become a criminal?
Aren't expeditions like that?
You have to bear a certain risk to take them on.
The woman retorted joyfully. A great power lies hidden inside the ruin.
Then, she continued in a suggestive tone, almost like she knew exactly what desperate earthlings like Pavlovichi wanted. However, Pavlovichi did not bite right away. Even if that's true, what's the reason you're telling me all this?
It's too sudden. Of course, there's something I want as well.
As for the reason I chose you, it's because I don't think you'll tell Valhalla at the very least.
Quote. This is an expedition that has to be carried out in utmost secrecy. If you're suspicious of my intentions, you're welcome to bring people along to help.
But, you know you can't go around spreading rumors about this ruin, right?
Just what is your?
That's it from me.
I can't give you any more information. So, if you're interested in redeeming your current way of life. The woman pushed the piece of paper that she put on the ground. The rendezvous point is just around the palace. You will be given a direct route into the palace then. The date will be settled on another day. You can hear the plan out and quit if you don't think it's plausible.
Judging by how confident she was, she seemed to have a surefire method.
Pavlovichi gulped in anticipation hearing the woman go so far.
Though he did not erase the suspicion he was outwardly showing, he spoke while looking interested.
If I can bring my own men, can I bring my brother? A blood-related brother should be trustworthy, so that's better for me.
But, I can't give you much time.
Finding him won't take long if I ask around. Anyway, you're saying that if my brother and I enter this ruin, we will be able to gain this so-called great power?
Power won't be all.
The woman's lips, faintly showing under the shrouding hood, drew a soft curve. She spread out her arms. You will be shown a whole new world. Asterisk. The woman left after that, and I immediately left Scheherazade after checking out the note. I then called my brother and secretly came to Eva.
Pavlovichi's story came to an end. He then did a double take and added,
If I may give my opinion. I think she changed what she was going to say in the middle.
How so?
I think she wanted to lure me to the ruin at first but then changed the topic to my brothers. Almost to make it so that I can't refuse.
Sol Ji-hoo glanced at Kim Hana while listening attentively. She said Pavlovichi suddenly came to Valhalla, but he didn't think so at all.
Use of variables. Was it when he came back to Eva after the Tigel Fortress War? Of course.
The Pavlovichi brothers were alive and well. If you had something like this, you should have told me about it sooner.
Intelligence isn't something that pops out of nowhere. You need some people to risk their lives on the front lines.
They're perfect for the job. Before using the divine stigmata, Sol Ji-hoo gave Kim Hana the communication crystal that was connected to Pavlovichi and delegated the work to her.
In the process of preparing for unexpected situations,
Kim Hana falsified missing cases and deaths, then moved Pavlovichi for when an incident really happened.
As a result,
the enemy had walked into the bait she set just in case. Sorry for not telling you about it sooner.
When Kim Hana met Sol Ji-hoo's eyes, she bowed her head respectfully. You were away when I was planning the matter, and a series of incidents broke out after you returned.
It wasn't as if the plan was particularly fruitful, so I did not bother mentioning it. Sol Ji-hoo did not care all that much. He had left Valhalla and its operations in Kim Hana's hands while he was away, and she had successfully read one move ahead and created such an opportune moment.
A ruin in Scheherazade. Sol Ji-hoo tapped on the desk with his index finger. There was something that caught his attention.
Can I see that note?
Of course.
Pavlovich took out a white note.
This is. Upon opening it, Sol Ji-hoo saw a map as he was told. It was a complex map leading to a circular region in the middle. Whoever drew it must have taken great care into perfecting it. What's the reason she gave you this map despite setting a rendezvous point?
Meeting at the rendezvous point was only to rehearse.
The actual date and the method were going to be decided at some other time. It also could have been to earn my trust. Interesting.
Setting aside whether this ruin truly exists, the people involved must be close to the palace to have drawn such a detailed map.
The Valhalla members in the room must have been intrigued as they gathered around the map. A ruin in Scheherazade. Seo Yu-hui also got up with an anxious expression and looked at the map.
Soon, a strong look of suspicion lit up her eyes.
Ha! A surprised yelp came out.
Nuna?
Ji-hoo, wait. Seo Yu-hui grabbed the map from Sol Ji-hoo's hands and brought it up to her nose.
A T-shaped corridor. A rotary that's intersected by 10 roads. There's no way.
Seo Yu-hui's face paled while she quickly murmured to herself.
What's wrong?
This is.
Seo Yu-hui shut her mouth before finishing her sentence. Sol Ji-hoo did not know what the deal was, but it was clear that Seo Yu-hui knew what that map detailed.
It seemed she just could not talk about it with outsiders in the room.
Is there anything else you want to tell me?
Huh? Oh, no, I don't. Great. Then. Sol Ji-hoo eyed Kim Hannah, and she took out a pouch from her pocket. Clang! A weighty sound rang out.
Pavlovich's eyes widened as bright yellow light trickled out of the half-open pouch.
No, we. Take it. You gave us a valuable piece of information.
Sol Ji-hoo spoke calmly.
Pavlovich carefully studied Sol Ji-hoo before grabbing the pouch.
Thank you for the info. And if I may give you a piece of advice, it'll be best if you stay out of paradise for a while.
Of course.
As it was clear that Sol Ji-hoo wanted him to leave, Pavlovich placed the pouch in his pocket and stood up. I was already planning to do that.
Since it's still early morning, I will head to the warp gate right away.
Pavlovich put on his hooded robe again and turned after a bow.
Asterisk.
After Pavlovich left, Valhalla held a meeting.
Seo Yu-hui still had a mixed expression while looking at the map. Sol Ji-hoo waited a moment before breaking the silence. Gorad Boga.
Seo Yu-hui, who was unceasingly staring at the map, raised her head. You knew about it? Judging by her reaction, it seemed she knew about it as well.
Rose Scheherazade told me personally when I last went to see her.
Then did you?
No.
All I was told was that Scheherazade was built atop Gorad Boga.
I did not hear anything else.
Sol Ji-hoo shook his head.
I see. Seo Yu-hui heaved out a deep sigh. Just what is this Gorad Boga?
Cho Hong asked impatiently.
Gorad Boga is a divine vestige.
It's a legendary divine city where a power of God lies dormant. A legendary divine city?
Is there a god hibernating there or something? No.
There are different types of Gorad Boga, but regarding the one in Scheherazade, you can think of it as a barrier that a god personally cast to protect the city.
Seo Yu-hui continued. There are two powers lying dormant inside Scheherazade. No, it would be more correct to say there is one power split into two stages. The first stage activates a mechanism that turns the entire city into a special territory, and the second stage releases the power of God stored in Gorad Boga to form a powerful barrier that envelopes the city. This is the first time I've heard of this. How do you know about this so well, Noonam? Cho Hong asked while blinking. Because
I've gone inside there once before.
Seo Yu-hui looked down at the map once again. I'm sure of it. I remember it clearly because the path there was an unusual maze. There is no doubt about it.
This is a map to Gorad Boga.
I'm not sure what all that means.
But this territory and barrier you talked about don't sound all that bad. In fact, isn't it good? That depends on how you use it, but yes.
To be honest, Gorad Boga itself isn't really a problem. But Seo Yuhui sighed again and bit her lower lip.
After much hesitation, she spoke reluctantly.
I'm sure you all have heard about the royal oath. Everyone nodded their heads.
As Charlotte Arya had used one not too long ago, everyone was well aware of what it was. It refers to the unbreakable oath that the gods made to the mortals. It goes without saying that this was not the only era where it existed. They also had other names, like the proof of chastity belonging to the Rothschild house that served castitas, or the promise of temperance belonging to the Retinhain house that served temperantia. Seo Yuhui cleared her throat. Besides the 7 virtues, there was also a family that served Paradise's chief deity.
The Gorgonu. Flone's voice flowed out of Sol Jihu's pendant.
That's right. The imperial oath belonging to the Gorgonu house, the emperor's lineage.
Seo Yuhui scanned everyone.
What I'm about to tell you from now is all hearsay. But when the parasite queen first arrived in Paradise, she was apparently in a critical state.
She remained hidden, secretly parasitizing living creatures, before releasing all of the nests in a secure location and expanding her force instantly.
Eventually, she managed to devour the chief deity. By devouring Paradise's chief deity, the parasite queen recovered her divinity to a certain extent. But to state it differently, the essence of her divinity became the chief deity's energy. Sung Shi-hyun, who found out about the imperial oath's existence, planned and executed a scheme. That was to sneak inside the empire while the parasite queen was busy leading a military expedition to Tigil Fortress, finding the imperial oath, and inheriting the authority over it.
Sol Jihu dropped his jaw. He could finally surmise the reason why the parasite queen backed off from the front lines. Sung Shi-hyun had activated the oath that even gods could not refuse and tried to chase the parasite queen out of Paradise. Though the risk was great, it was certainly a plan worth trying. As for that plan, Sung Shi-hyun revealed the plan to me and Miss Baek Haiju, and we infiltrated the empire. It wasn't easy, but we managed to find the imperial oath after much trouble and even talked to the remnant wool of the chief deity inside the steel and inherited the authority. We activated the imperial oath right there and then. Then why? Cho Hong asked in a daze. It was only half successful. Seo Yuhui smacked her lips. The result would have been better if we had executed the plan earlier. Unfortunately, we were a step late. The imperial oath activated successfully, but the parasite queen had already digested over half of the chief deity's power. Though we only found out later, she had corrupted the empire's land and turned it into her own, so the effect of the oath was halved. In other words, the parasite queen had suppressed the activation of the imperial oath using the power she digested, and after returning to the empire in a hurry, she was now controlling her power in her own territory. You mean, the imperial oath is still in effect right now? Yes, it should be. Seo Yuhui nodded her head at Sol Jihu's question. Sol Jihu finally understood. The parasite queen was using the vast majority of her recovered divinity in preventing herself from being expelled from the planet. Because the power of the oath would get stronger if she left her territory, she was not able to leave the empire. Not unless it was for a great emergency like the one at Tigil Fortress. Though it was still a great achievement, that wasn't the only problem. Seo Yuhui smacked her lips and narrowed her eyes. The real problem happened after the matter. Right after we activated the oath. Chapter 415. The Parasite Queen Expulsion Plan. Seo Yuhui thought it was feasible when she first heard about the plan from Sung Shi-hyun. The Parasite Queen had taken along 5 of the 7 armies to attack Tigil Fortress. Furthermore, the remaining 2 armies were nowhere to be found in the Middle World. While it was highly optimistic,
She thought that sneaking into the empty empire to find the imperial oath was doable. However, the idea shattered into pieces as soon as they entered the parasite's territory. Searching the Queen's residential area out of all the parasite's territory was a far more difficult task than they had imagined. They felt like their energy was being sapped just by walking. It could be said that the very soil they stepped on was their enemy.
Furthermore, they had no idea how enemies kept appearing everywhere they went despite them trying their hardest to conceal their presence. When they met an army commander that they thought was absent from the middle world, they thought it was over.
If it wasn't for Sung Shi-hyun's trick successfully deceiving exploding patients, they definitely would have been wiped out. While there were many dangerous moments where their hearts almost burst out of their chests, the expedition team of the most elite Earthlings somehow arrived at their destination. That was how they found the imperial oath that they desperately looked for and inherited the rightful authority over it after awakening the remnant will of the chief deity.
And at that moment, they activated the imperial oath. With this, their mission was complete.
"Is it over?" a young man who knocked a chained arrow to his bow muttered in a weak voice. He listlessly stared at the 3 steel pieces that had combined into one and were now blazing with white light.
It was the Star of Pride, Sergio Carrillo.
The parasite queen, whose name was practically synonymous with terror, had been driven out of paradise as of this moment. It was only natural for him to doubt as he knew just how powerful the parasite queen was as a being, with powers dimensions apart from them.
Now it's really. Shut the fuck up, moron.
Just as he was about to confirm again, a temperamental voice cut him off.
Sergio Carrillo's face twitched.
"What?
You crazy bastard.
How dare you set a death flag? Are you trying to kill us all?"
Sung Shi-hyun spat as he sat on the floor of the stone chamber, catching his breath. Sergio Carrillo frowned. What bullshit is this all of a sudden?
Do you want to fucking die?
It's not over yet, so don't go thoughtlessly running your fucking mouth.
Now, why are you two fighting again? It's a good day today. As the atmosphere between the two became rough, a burly man with wounds all over his body stepped up as if it was a normal occurrence.
It was the Star of Wrath, Wu Lei. Sergio Carrillo snorted and turned his head.
We'll have to wait to find out if today will be a good day or not.
Sung Shi-hyun also let out a snort.
Then let's confirm it. An tired voice intervened. A pale-faced Roberto Servillo took out a communication crystal from his pocket.
The Federation should still be at war with the parasites. The royal family of Harem should be reachable. Why bother? Just ask the steel over there.
Sung Shi-hyun raised himself up and stopped his steps in front of the shining steel.
Old man chief deity.
Are you still there? You are, right? Then uncharacteristically looking slightly nervous, he took a deep breath before asking. The oath, it's properly been activated, right?
Right? All eyes were focused on the steel. After a minute that seemed like 10.
Yes, the oath has been activated. A grand voice rang within the stone chamber. Sung Shi-hyun, who had been intently staring at the steel, widened his eyes. A smile finally appeared on his face.
Ha 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 ha.
Hear that? I told you it was a good day.
Wu Lei also burst into laughter.
Philip Muller, who was sitting on the wall striking a sorry figure, quietly let out a relieved sigh.
Good.
Did you hear that? Yu-hui? Haiju? Sung Shi-hyun clenched his fist.
Kaya? Old man chief deity, so you ended up being of some help in the end, huh? Yuke. I've been cussing you out all this time, wondering how much of a retard you must have been to get eaten by the parasite queen. I'm sorry. I apologize. It was then. Just as he was just about to grasp the steel with a smiling face. Qua! Intense darkness suddenly poured out from within the steel. The darkness quickly devoured the light, and Sung Shi-hyun fell backward with a scream. Awk! As he rolled on the floor, grabbing his hand with which he had tried to grab the steel,
Xiao Yuhui swiftly unleashed holy power. What happened? Baek Haiju shouted. However, no one could open their mouths to respond as everyone was equally shocked.
The goddess of parasitism.
After a brief pause, a hurried voice came out of the steel.
She found the location of the oath. My power.
How could she have already? After barely calming down, Sung Shi-hyun opened his eyes. What are you saying all of a sudden? You said the oath was activated.
She's taking over my consciousness. I'll soon be.
The chief deity's voice began to fade. Sensing that things were going awry, Sung Shi-hyun braced his sword. Drawing out a white sword chi, he fiercely swung his sword at the steel veiled in darkness.
Tekong. However, the steel did not budge.
Rather, the sword chi rapidly disappeared as soon as it came into contact with the darkness, leaving behind only a meaningless metallic ring.
Fuck.
Sung Shi-hyun cursed, and as he was about to slash out with an even powerful sword chi, he suddenly hesitated.
Wait a moment. Since I inherited the authority,
if I destroy the steel with my own hands, will the oath be nulled? Sung Shi-hyun blankly blinked his eyes before his expression gradually distorted. No matter how he looked at it, it wasn't a good choice. In the unlikely event that the oath did get nulled, then he would have made a fool out of himself. Not to mention that the steel didn't even get scratched after receiving his fully powered swing. Damn it, just what's going on? Sung Shi-hyun yelled.
Old man chief deity.
What the hell happened?
Run. Parasites. This way. However, only unintelligible phrases were heard from the steel. The goddess of parasitism must never regain the steel.
What? What are you saying?
Hide the steel. So it can't be found. The voice became fainter. In a place that can suppress this darkness.
After squeezing out the last sentence, the voice suddenly stopped.
The light on the steel blinked out at the same time. Old man chief deity?
Sung Shi-hyun called out many times, but the chief deity's voice could no longer be heard.
Only the steel with darkness dancing on top of it, as if signaling its location, was left. Before long, the steel split into 3 pieces again with a loud crack before falling on the floor. Damn it!
Sung Shi-hyun threw his pure white sword on the ground. His face that had been full of happiness was now replaced with despair. This shitty chief deity.
He can't do anything right. I should have known from the start. This fucking son of a bitch. And the parasite queen, that goddamn bitch. Isn't it common sense for her to fuck off after all this? While the angry Sung Shi-hyun shouted into the void, Roberto Servillo tightly gripped the communication crystal. The parasites are retreating. They say that the parasite queen who was at the forefront of the battlefield suddenly vomited blood and collapsed. Hearing those words, Sung Shi-hyun stopped yelling. You mean, the oath wasn't completely ineffective then? It looks to be the case. She wouldn't have suddenly collapsed otherwise. Roberto Servillo let out a deep sigh.
Also, the parasites are retreating back to the Empire at full speed, ignoring the Federation's pursuit. Everyone's faces froze stiff. They remembered the chief deity's last warning.
Anywhere.
Philip Muller powerlessly looked at the steel that was broken into 3 pieces. It'll be a good idea to take those and be anywhere that's not here. No one else spoke, but they all shared the same mind. Xiao Yuhui was the first to take action.
She took out several sheets of white cloth with magic circles inscribed on them before drenching them in holy water and blessing them.
Then, she wrapped each piece of the steel in multiple layers of cloth before tying them in a sack. A moment later, the expedition team hastily left the stone chamber with the steel. They were luckily able to return without any accident, but hiding the steel posed a problem.
Even though Xiao Yuhui kept pouring holy power onto the steel, the 3 pieces relentlessly emitted darkness. According to the chief deity, the darkness served as a beacon to inform the parasite queen of its location. In other words, if it was left as it was, they would become targets of the parasite queen who was trying to regain her divinity.
The expedition team racked their heads for a solution. They tried putting them into the unique Ranker's dimensional pocket, but they couldn't hide the darkness energy. They tried hiding it in the temple storage, but the seven sins refused, saying that the darkness contained a part of the parasite queen's consciousness and could possibly corrupt them. In the end, the expedition team couldn't come up with a solution, so Sung Shi-hyun, Baek Haiju, and Seo Yuhui each took one piece of the steel. The three of them agreed to each find a suitable place and hide the imperial oath so no one could find it.
It was to prevent the parasite queen from recovering, even if the pieces were taken from one or two of them. And so, while Seo Yuhui took the steel and traveled around all of paradise, she accidentally chanced upon a suitable place to hide the piece. Though there wasn't a living god there, the power of a god lied dormant there.
Just like that, Seo Yuhui headed to Scheherazade.
So,
Newnham, you hid the steel in a place called Gorad Boga managed by the Scheherazade royal family?
Chohong asked as soon as the story was over. Yes. I received permission from Rose Scheherazade to enter Gorad Boga. I thought it would be safe there, but… Seo Yuhui didn't continue and closed her eyes. No way. Sol Jihu realized what she was worried about. What if Rose Scheherazade became a traitor? Obviously, the Queen of Scheherazade would never have switched sides in the beginning. However, perhaps,
if Seo Yuhui hid the steel inside Scheherazade royal palace, and Rose Scheherazade's mentality had gradually weakened since that day because of it. You're right. As Uni said, Gorad Boga itself doesn't seem to be much of a problem.
Yuri murmured as if she had realized something. Seo Yuhui nodded with difficulty. Right. They're not aiming for Gorad Boga but the steel inside it. And that unidentified woman. Her voice hinted she was praying that the woman was not Rose Scheherazade. Sol Jihu clenched his teeth. It was hard to say it was Seo Yuhui's fault. Knowing her, she would have placed the utmost caution. But despite that, what if Scheherazade's queen turned traitor? Are you not going to destroy Sinyang? Rose Scheherazade must have wanted it herself. Sol Jihu let out a soft groan. It felt like the scattered puzzle pieces were clicking into place, one by one. Nuna, since Sung Shi-hyun went over to the parasites. It won't be wrong to say that they already have a piece of the steel. Seo Yuhui bit her lip. If they managed to get the piece within Gorad Boga, they would have two in their hands. Sol Jihu began to feel the urgency. The feeling of having only one life left was completely different from having two. No, they might already be down to only one. They couldn't rule out the possibility that the parasites already found the remaining piece. Miss Baek Haiju knows where the remaining piece is, right? Yes. But I only know that she hid it in a place she coincidentally found that's neither in the Federation or the human territory. We promised each other not to reveal the places. Sol Jihu closed his eyes. He asked after quickly organizing his thoughts. Can the steel in Gorad Boga be taken out immediately if one wished to? No. That's impossible, even for me. What about Rose Scheherazade? That should be the case for her too. Seo Yuhui shook her head. The two-layered formation within Gorad Boga is an extremely powerful divine spell that can hold strong for several days, even if the ones striking it are gods. Not even Scheherazade's royal blood can freely enter that place. Back then, I only barely managed to send the steel piece in after expending a great amount of contributions points and holy power. Seo Yuhui paused for a moment before continuing. And I didn't immediately leave Gorad Boga after successfully sending the steel inside. After receiving permission from Rose Scheherazade, I set up a powerful barrier as well. A barrier? In Gorad Boga? Yes. I prayed for 100 days inside the ruin to set up a barrier. I even left behind a holy artifact to keep it semi-permanent. What kind of barrier was it? It was the strongest spell I knew back then. I'll be notified if anyone tries to forcefully break the barrier. And it's not easy to break the barrier through normal methods.
Xiao Yuhui continued.
To release the barrier, an offering has to be sacrificed.
Not just any ordinary offering, but a special one. By a special offering, you mean a human?
Xiao Yuhui briskly replied. Sol Jihu's mouth dropped open. Wait a minute.
Then the reason she gave Pavlovici the map was to.
It was probably because they needed a sacrifice. Of course, a single person would have been nowhere close to enough, so she suggested bringing his comrades. Xiao Yuhui sighed. I know that it's wrong to use methods that require human sacrifices.
But I had no other choice. That steel is something that should never be handed over to the parasites. Sol Jihu nodded. The issue at hand wasn't whether things were moral or not. Xiao Yuhui had devoted 100 days to place a powerful barrier in case something went wrong.
It was somewhat reassuring.
Then the steel is doubly protected then.
Even if your barrier breaks, another layer is protecting Gorad Boga from within, so it won't be easy getting in. Sol Jihu's voice lightened a bit.
That's right, but nothing is certain.
Xiao Yuhui's face, however, remained dark. Rose Scheherazade has the royal oath.
Quote.
The royal oath is a pledge that even gods cannot disobey. If they break my barrier and use the royal oath to disable the barrier within Gorad Boga. Sol Jihu's face became stiff. He hadn't thought of that method. While Xiao Yuhui's worry was the worst possible scenario, it was still possible.
Having thought up to that point, they had no more reason to hesitate. They knew what they had to do.
I'll contact the organizations in Scheherazade. Kim Hannah was already setting down several communication crystals on the table.
If human sacrifices are necessary, then it'll be best if no one is allowed to go near the palace.
I'll also ask them to keep watch on Rose Scheherazade.
Do it without letting Rose Scheherazade find out, and just to be safe, Sinyang as well.
Of course. After seeing Kim Hannah nod her head, Sol Jihu looked back at Xiao Yuhui. Nuna.
Can you bring Miss Baek Haiju back to paradise somehow?
The sooner the better. I'll go right away. Xiao Yuhui immediately got up from her seat. And that very evening, Baek Haiju entered paradise. That night. In the middle of a calm and tranquil sea where no wind blew, a small wave suddenly broke out. A tremor rippled out in the jet-black ocean as a shadow quietly surfaced above the water. A head matted with dark purple hair and a pair of goat horns quickly scanned the area. After cautiously looking around for a long time, it spread the pair of black wings on its back and carefully broke out of the water. That wasn't the only place. Shadows quietly slipped out without a sound in multiple spots of waters around the city. Everyone. You know what to do, right? An elegant yet mysterious voice was transmitted to all the shadows that revealed themselves. A smile full of white teeth flashed within the darkness as if the silence over the sleeping city was to its liking. Quietly, thoroughly. At that moment. And quickly. The succubi led by the 6th Army commander, Vulgar Chastity, simultaneously spread their bat wings. Chapter 416. Nur was a port city located in the northwest corner of the human territory, facing the parasites with the Mariposa Sea between them. The presence of the body of water hardly meant the city was safe from invasion. Some parasites were capable of flying, and there had already been one case in which the parasites crossed the sea to attack Nur. Having said that, it was undeniable that in recent years the parasites had concentrated its forces on Tigil Fortress, and that it was only in Haramark's Arden Valley that it had clashed with humanity. It was a pitch-black night, without a hint of color. The Coast Guard on duty yawned before suddenly blinking his eyes. He thought he saw something moving beneath the dark waters. Although his eyesight was exceptional for a mere guard, unfortunately for him, the enemy had already begun to move. Whoosh!
The shadow jumped at him with great speed. When the guard turned his eyes to the sea, the shadow was already behind him, its eyes glowing with malice.
What? The light instantly disappeared from the guard's eyes and his arms fell to his sides. Aw! His body shook as if he were drunk and he fell toward the sea.
The succubus quickly grabbed the guard by his neck and slowly pushed him into the sea as if feeding the water.
Carefully, so that no sound would disturb the silence, tentacles shot up from the sea even before the body reached the surface. They wrapped around the body and dragged it quietly into the water. What happened next was a mystery to all, but soon blood dyed the water red. These kinds of events were happening simultaneously along the coastline of Nur. Good. When the succubi finished removing all guards from the coast, vulgar chastity looked down at the sea with a nod of approval. Come up. With that, a fish-shaped monster that had tentacles sprouting from all over its body appeared above the surface of the sea. It was the Temerator, the final evolved form of upper-rank parasites that gave birth to middle-rank parasites. When vulgar chastity signaled, hundreds of Temerators opened their mouths at once and fired sound waves at the city. The sound waves quickly spread and took control of the entire city, successfully disabling all forms of communication in Nur. Move. Vulgar chastity continued to issue orders without a break. Under her command, the succubi split into 4 groups and headed to the gates located in the east, west, north, and south of the city, respectively. In order for the first phase of their plan, the invasion of Nur, to succeed, they had to exterminate the entire city without allowing a single survivor. A short moment later a head appeared above the sea from where vulgar chastity had already left. It was Sung Shihyun, the first army commander of the parasites. Fuck, this is way too easy. He smirked in the direction of Nur, still sleeping without knowing what was about to happen to them, and then dragged his wet body out of the water onto the shore. As expected, he wasn't the only one. The 3rd Army Commander, Abhorrent Charity, and the 5th Army Commander, Exploding Patience, led their troops to the shore. The 7th Army Commander, Twisted Kindness, who had been gracefully floating in the air, also prepared to descend. Parasites tied to the tentacles of the Temerators also appeared behind the army. Splat, splat. The coast turned black in an instant. You know what to do, right? Standing at the forefront, Sung Shihyun turned his head left and right to loosen his neck, and aimed his long sword at the city. We're screwed if we miss even one. Seize quickly, but don't make any mistakes. Then he kicked the ground and shot forward towards the city. At the same time, the parasite army, led by the 5 army commanders, rushed at Nur. Dawn had already broken when a group of Earthlings arrived at Nur. I'm so tired. I need to get some sleep. We should stay at a high-class inn. The rewards were pretty good this time. It seemed like they were on their way back from an expedition. Laughing cheerfully among themselves, they entered the city without suspecting anything, for there were a few other Earthlings besides themselves heading for the gate, as well as guards keeping watch nearby. Only after passing through the gate did they realize something was off. Huh? What the? Why is it so quiet? The city was quiet, and there was something ominous about the silence. They could even hear themselves breathe. One of the men looked around, dazed with his brow wrinkled. Even considering the fact that it was still early in the morning, it was strange that there was no one on the street. Another thing that caught his eye was the collapsed buildings. As far as he remembered, these buildings were intact when they left the city. And there was this nasty smell. It was the smell of rotting flesh and blood. What happened? Hey, did something happen here last night? The man asked the Earthling entering the gate. But no reply came to his ears. The Earthling passed him without a word. Hey! The man's eyes widened. Because the woman who ignored him had suddenly stopped. She turned around and staggered past the man again towards the gate. She continued to walk back and forth like a corpse.
That wasn't all.
Guard.
Despite the desperate call, the guard at the gate didn't even look back. What's going on?
The man finally realized something was wrong and began to back away.
But he was too late.
Look, we should.
The man turned around and opened his eyes wide in astonishment.
His comrades were looking down at the ground, their faces as pale as ghosts. Their ankles were bound by tentacles stretching out from holes in the ground. The same had happened to his own ankles. At the same time, the earthlings walking into and out of the city all stopped at once. Creak, creak. They turned their heads to their prey. What? The man could not grasp the situation.
Still, even in the midst of confusion, he knew instinctively what was about to happen.
What is this? Tears began to well up in his eyes.
The next moment the corpses rushed at him with their mouths stretched to their ears.
Asterisk. On the day Baek Haiju arrived, Seol Ji-hoo held a meeting.
The topic of the meeting was the Gorad Boga expedition.
Their plan was simple. First, they were to meet the Queen of Scheherazade and use Rasel's mana to find out what she was hiding. Then they would decide what to do with the steel, with the option of Seol Ji-hoo bringing it with him or leaving it in Gorad Boga. Seol Ji-hoo got up at the crack of dawn and started preparing immediately. He put on his gloves, wrapped the transparent cloak he received from Vidalif around him, and headed for the temple with the spear of purity in his hand. It was because the storage where he kept the divine elixirs was in the temple. He always carried one with him but kept the others in storage. Harmonia Magic Square. Seol Ji-hoo stared at the cube surrounded by black energy. This box he obtained in the special tutorial infused the user with powerful mana that transformed the mana circuit from within. More precisely, it activated the reverse flow energy against natural laws. Seol Ji-hoo had planned to use it as soon as he finished the Path of the Soul trial, but quit because Black Seol Ji-hoo strongly opposed it. Quit talking nonsense. Don't you know how dangerous that thing is? I hate words like awakening and rampage. Awakening skill itself puts great pressure on the body. As if that isn't enough, you want to mess up your body's structure to forcefully increase your innate potential? Are you out of your mind? What's that? You actually think that the magic square can be controlled? Didn't you read the description? It says there that it's unstable. Sure. It's usable if the user keeps it at an appropriate level. But let's be honest, do you really think you won't strain yourself? If you really want to use it, then by all means do so. But don't learn Berserk and don't even think about learning Thousand Thunder for me. With that, Seol Ji-hoo could no longer be stubborn. Both were dangerous techniques, but it was more reasonable to learn Thousand Thunder since it did not distort the user's mana circuit. I told him I won't use it, but who knows what will happen in the future. Seol Ji-hoo stuffed the Harmonia Magic Square into his backpack. When he returned to the Valhalla building, most of the members had already arrived before him. The carriages arrived shortly after and in turn they boarded the carriages. Keying. Just as Seol Ji-hoo was about to climb up, he felt something pull his foot. The little fuzzballs had gathered around him and were biting and pulling his ankle. Seol Ji-hoo blinked once before kneeling down and facing their sympathy-winning eyes. What's wrong? You don't want me to go? King. I'm sorry, but you have to wait. I promise I'll play with you guys when I get back. Keying. Until I get back, eat well, play hard, and be good, okay? Seol Ji-hoo stroked their heads one by one and then stood up. Then he climbed up into the carriage and closed the door. Keying. He could hear the little claws scratching the carriage door. Why are they doing that all of a sudden? Now I feel bad for them. They sound so sad. I don't know. Seol Ji-hoo shrugged and let out a small sigh. Then he spoke. Let's go. A moment later, the carriages carrying the members of Valhalla swiftly passed through the gate. Around the same time,
the road between Nur and Scheherazade made for a spectacular sight.
Darkness covered both the land and the sky.
There was no order or pattern in the way it moved.
It was rushing forward as if reaching its destination was its only purpose in life.
The parasites had successfully taken control of Nur in just one day and were now heading for its next destination. To Scheherazade.
Of course, running wasn't all they were doing. They did have a strategy.
In Nur, for example, they were careful to leave the city as intact as possible. They also picked out about 100 undamaged bodies, turned them into parasites, and ordered the succubi to hypnotize them. This deception tactic was intended to delay the enemy finding out that Nur had been attacked.
In addition, I see 6 insects 1 kilometer ahead. They were using twisted kindness as an aerial scout. Upon hearing her report, a group of succubi flapped their wings and hurried forward.
The earthlings who spotted them stood dazed for a moment, then turned in a hurry to escape when one of the succubi stretched out her arm in their direction.
Flash! Light exploded and rays of light pierced the earthlings' chests. It was photon magic.
The earthlings all fell to the ground at the same time, and the succubi quickly flew towards them and caught their bodies.
Do we have to be this thorough?
Vulgar Chastity, watching the sight from afar, lowered her head. She was holding Sung Shi-hyun in her arms.
Even if the enemy notices, it's just one city.
Seizing it will be as easy as pie.
Her argument wasn't entirely unfounded. Only a few years ago, 3 out of the total 7 armies were enough to destroy humanity forever.
There were now a total of 5 armies heading to Scheherazade, among them the most powerful army commander, Twisted Kindness.
Taking down Scheherazade seemed like a piece of cake.
Nevertheless, Sung Shi-hyun's expression remained nonchalant. He seemed too annoyed to even answer Vulgar Chastity's question, but because her gaze lingered on him for too long, finally he spoke with a frown.
Do you think we're doing this just to conquer a city?
We aren't?
I'm talking about our ultimate goal.
You think we're going through all this crap just for a piece of stone? I hate repeating myself, so remember when I say this.
Forget about the city and the steel.
Your only focus should be killing that bastard. I know, but what could go wrong at this point?
Even if he realizes right now, it's… Suddenly, Vulgar Chastity stopped. Because she saw Sung Shi-hyun's face distort into anger. Listen, you stupid bitch. Can you please just keep your mouth shut?
What?
I said, shut the fuck up.
Because I'm hating myself more every time you speak.
Aw.
Why was I so afraid of these shit for brains?
Vulgar Chastity's eyelashes trembled. I feel sorry for the queen. She has to put up with these good-for-nothing fuckers.
What did you say? Exploding patience, the Banshee Queen, who was flying beside them, growled at Sung Shi-hyun.
You see, this is why they say ignorance is bliss. Stupid fuckers are always too proud.
Sung Shi-hyun shook his head left and right. Who do you think you are? With a big sigh, he pushed up his bangs with his hand and asked coldly.
Aren't you the parasites' army commanders?
For someone who's in charge of an entire army, and even received the divinity, your brains sure don't work.
You!
Didn't I tell you not to let your guard down during this mission? To always assume the worst?
Sung Shi-hyun said in a bleak voice, and exploding patience flinched.
The worst assumption at this point is that they find out who the traitors are and arrive at Scheherazade before us. Sung Shi-hyun continued in an annoyed voice like he was doing the rest a favor.
If that happens, our plan will become useless.
That's why, no matter what happens, we have to get to Scheherazade before them.
Still?
There's no way he'll notice. There's no way he'll arrive before us?
It's because you keep thinking like that you keep losing. What?
You don't agree?
But I'm right.
There's no way, Tilda. I bet that's what you thought before you got beat up by the brightest star.
Like a freaking punching bag. Isn't that why we're in this shit right now?
Sung Shi-hyun's sarcastic tone caused the army commander's blood to boil. These criticisms were unbearable for someone as proud as they were. Admit it, you retards. You lost.
To him. Because of your complacency.
The atmosphere grew hostile, but Sung Shi-hyun only snorted, not even flinching.
What? You want the same thing to happen again? Are you gonna let him drive you into a corner so that you can go running to Her Majesty? Your Majesty tilde I'm sorry tilde I didn't know this would happen tilde Your Majesty tilde what should I do tilde Your Majesty tilde save us tilde Your Majesty tilde. Are you a fucking child?
Vulgar Chastity almost loosened her arms holding Sung Shi-hyun.
She'd felt this way when he was still her enemy.
This guy had a real talent for mocking others. Her anger soared, but she had no choice but to keep her mouth shut. Because Sung Shi-hyun, who successfully learned to control his divinity, had risen to the same realm as Twisted Kindness.
And frankly, what he said wasn't wrong.
That was in fact the way it had been during the Arden Valley War, the Spirit Realm Expedition, and the Tiggle Fortress War.
Most importantly, Sung Shi-hyun was the chief commander of this operation. For this mission alone, the first army commander possessed the same authority as the Parasite Queen. If our goal is to draw him out, couldn't we have done so in Scheherazade? Twisted Kindness asked after a moment of silence.
There's a possibility that could have worked. Sung Shi-hyun answered with a nonchalant expression.
But I told you. He excels at creating variables. I'm sure this time again he'll come up with an idea that no one's ever thought of. Quote. More importantly, the enemy isn't stupid. Even if we successfully take over Scheherazade, he isn't going to come running to us.
Even if he retreats, couldn't we just follow him and kill him?
Vulgar Chastity interrupted. Jesus fuck, he'll find out about Nur soon. And Scheherazade is in the middle of the enemy territory. Do you really think he'll come alone?
Sung Shi-hyun snapped again. And, if we were going to do that, don't you think we would have gathered as many soldiers as possible in the Hirul mountain range and attacked Eva, instead of crossing the Mariposa Sea and attacking Nur?
Vulgar Chastity pouted because Sung Shi-hyun seemed irritated only when she spoke. Whatever. I'm the chief commander of this mission. If you don't understand what's going on, just shut up and do as I say. Disobey, and I'll kill you myself. I don't care if you're an army commander or not. Okay, I get it. That's enough. Vulgar Chastity mumbled.
Then shut up and get moving. Sung Shi-hyun snorted and continued.
Remember, you're my puppets in this mission. Quote. If we win, clap your hands and praise me. If we lose, then you can swear or throw a fucking tantrum or whatever.
Basically he was saying they should blindly follow his orders.
You sound very confident.
We'll see how it goes.
Twisted Kindness remarked calmly and recited a dragonic spell.
Abhorrent Charity also cast a spell.
A violent gust of wind blew past them. Whoosh! With Sung Shi-hyun in her arms, Vulgar Chastity flew across the sky at jet speed. On the third night after leaving Eva, Sol Ji-hoo realized something wasn't right. In the middle of the night, Phi Sora, who was on a night watch, woke Sol Ji-hoo up as he slept in a tent at a campsite they had set up. They had stopped to rest the horses that had been running non-stop for 2 days in a row. Apparently he got a call from Kim Hannah. What? Sol Ji-hoo's brow furrowed as he listened. We lost contact with Nur? Yes, the call is going through, but no one is answering. Not even the royal family. Fortunately, the Japanese Business Federation managed to get in touch with a couple of Earthlings near Nur and sent them to the city, but soon lost contact with them, too. Dazed, Sol Ji-hoo listened to her quietly. His eyes slowly began to fill with anxious curiosity. Nur had suddenly stopped responding to their contact. Such a thing will be impossible unless more than half of the 7 armies attack at once.
Sol Ji-hoo thought so before gasping in disbelief. Why right now?
It all felt too staged to be a coincidence. Kim Hana. The corners of his mouth trembled, but he swallowed once and continued.
Listen to me carefully.
Oh, okay.
Contact the organization in Scheherazade to capture Ro Scheherazade and her attendant. Tell them that whatever happens, they must take away the royal oath.
I'll take responsibility for everything.
Kim Hana seemed more than surprised.
It was a risky move as the situation wasn't clear yet.
But soon she realized Sol Ji-hoo's intention and asked calmly. What if the two have already vanished?
Where else would they go besides Gorad Boga?
I'll ask Yuhui Nuna the exact coordinates and give you a map.
I understand. Contact every single royal family and representative organizations except for Scheherazade's.
Have them issue a draft call and send all available soldiers to Scheherazade. This has to happen today.
Hurry up. Sol Ji-hoo ended the call with a shout. He got up to wake up his comrades, but the campground was already bustling with noise. I said, I'll pay you enough to buy 100 new Horuses.
Phi Sora, who overheard their conversation, had already awakened the rest of the members and was bargaining with the wagoner who claimed he was too tired to move.
Sol Ji-hoo quickly took out another communication crystal from his pocket. The crystal was linked directly to Sinyoung. I wasn't going to contact them, but the situation had changed. He wasn't sure, but no, he was sure. Now was the time to exhaust every means possible. Come on.
Why isn't she picking up?
Sol Ji-hoo chewed his lips with his hand over the crystal. With a nervous look, he raised his chin up to the sky. The night sky was dimmer now as a blanket of dark clouds covered the moon. He thought he heard crows in the distance. Sol Ji-hoo let out a grunt of frustration as all these seemed like a bad omen to him. The situation was rapidly deteriorating. Chapter 417.
Yun Seahui did not pick up the call.
No, she couldn't. It was because she was on Earth, and not in paradise when Sol Ji-hoo called her. When she heard the news and returned to paradise, the communication crystal was still flashing with light. Yun Seahui looked at the pure light with a slight surprise before looking down at the shining orb. It had taken her 20 minutes to enter paradise after receiving a phone call saying that Representative Sol was looking for her. In other words, 1 hour had gone by in paradise's time.
Have they been calling this whole time? Yes. I told them I would let them know when the director comes back, but they've continued to call every 5 minutes.
Yun
Seahui placed her hand on the orb but did not pick up the call right away.
She narrowed her eyes at the orb, thinking of playing hard to get.
The current relationship between Valhalla and Sinyoung was at its worst. Valhalla's representative had a family member targeted on Earth, and Sinyoung was the prime suspect behind the incident. Of course, there was no way to prove that they were behind it, but it was true that they committed the grave error of letting Jung Minjong escape. Hence, there should only be one reason for Valhalla's representative to be calling her at this point. The fact that he has been calling her non-stop like an obsessed ex-boyfriend. It just didn't add up.
Moreover, the Sol Ji-hoo she knew was a man of action rather than words.
As Yun Seahui was wrapping up her thoughts, the call ended. Yun Seahui still had her hand placed on the orb. Then, when the orb lit up before 5 minutes went by, her eyes curved in a peculiar fashion.
Next, Yun Seahui's breathing suddenly became rough. She cleared her throat and waited for the call to end yet again. When the light flickered off from the orb, she counted to 100 and then infused her mana into it. I'm sorry. Pot.
Yun Seahui apologized in a hurry as soon as a light burst out.
I wasn't in paradise and only heard a moment ago. I came running right away. She gasped for breath like someone who just did a 100-meter sprint.
She had many excuses to give.
She planned to mention the incident that happened on Earth to justify her lateness, all the while stealthily showing how remorseful she was. Currently, the only thing in her mind was the relationship between her and Sol Ji-hoo.
That was, until she heard what the other person said.
On Earth. Ha!
Yun Seo-hui's tone went up toward the end.
Lady Rose Scheherazade?
Her fake crying voice subsided as a low voice continued to ring out from the orb.
Yes, yes. It's hard to believe, but we'll make a move right away.
Don't worry too much. Yun Seo-hui replied amiably and nodded her head. She then turned to the young man as soon as the call ended. Did something happen in Nur?
Yes. It hasn't been confirmed yet, but all contact has been cut off from Nur a few days ago.
Not only the Nur royal family but also every single organization in it is not picking up any calls. Yun Seo-hui furrowed her fair brows at the young man's reply. A few days ago? How many days has it been exactly? Valhalla's representative said he received the news 4 days after he set off from Eva.
I am not sure. We only heard news of it today.
The Japan Business Federation apparently asked a team that was nearby to investigate, but it seems they lost contact with them as well. That meant something might have happened more than 3 days ago. It was certainly strange, but it should have been fine to take action after investigating it more thoroughly. Yun Seo-hui remembered the request that Sol Ji-hoo just made. To secure Rose Scheherazade and her attendant and protect the city.
Or to only secure Rose Scheherazade and her attendant and leave the city.
And if that wasn't possible either, to kill Rose Scheherazade and leave the city.
She did not hear wrong.
Sol Ji-hoo had asked her to kill Rose Scheherazade.
Furthermore, he said to secure the royal oath if possible.
Yun Seo-hui tilted her head before shaking it side to side. Rose Scheherazade being a traitor wasn't so hard to believe, but killing her was simply too daring. Regardless, Yun Seo-hui saw this as an opportunity. Sol Ji-hoo was in such a rush that he had called someone he hated and made an earnest request. For Yun Seo-hui, who was walking on a tightrope, this request should become a sturdy rope for her to cling onto.
Tell Lady Rose Scheherazade to come here. She sounded like someone who was summoning her subordinate. Even in reality, Rose Scheherazade had become Sin Young's puppet during the time of Yun Seo-jin, and the status quo did not change after Yun Seo-hui took power. She knew about the situation Scheherazade's queen was in but had simply ignored it. Tell her to come right now. We need to get hold of her first. If other organizations butt in, you're welcome to use the authority of the representative organization. Understood. The young man rushed out of the office.
Then about 30 minutes later, he ran back inside in a hurry.
Director.
Yun Seo-hui was in the middle of her second call with Sol Ji-hoo, busily drawing a map on a piece of paper.
Hold on. She asked to be excused, turned to the young man, and asked loudly.
Did she disappear?
We secured the attendant, but Lady Rose Scheherazade is nowhere to be seen.
The young man nodded his head in a daze. We have the attendant. Yun Seo-hui repeated the message at the crystal. Lady Rose Scheherazade has. Yes, she disappeared. It's just like you said. So she is hiding in this place? Yun Seo-hui put her pen down.
Got it. I'll form an expedition team and check it out personally. With that, she hung up the call, tilted her head, and looked up at the ceiling.
By now, Yun Seo-hui was feeling a bit uncomfortable.
She thought this would be an insignificant matter. But it really seemed as if.
Tapping anxiously on her desk, Yun Seo-hui looked back at the young man, who was standing in the room awkwardly. How long does it take to get to Nur from Scheherazade? Pardon?
About 10 days by carriage.
What if you rush there in a fully drawn carriage?
If the Horaces don't exhaust themselves out, I'm sure the time can be cut in half. In that case.
Yun Seo-hui thought for a moment before asking.
What if you travel by plane?
By plane?
The young man retorted in a fluster. He couldn't understand why she was asking about a plane when it didn't exist in paradise.
However, Yun Seo-hui's expression was turning more and more serious.
It was because she thought of a worst-case scenario.
As proven many times in the past, the parasites could march at a speed transcending one's wildest imaginations. Besides having the physical body modified through the virtue of parasitism, there were entities within the parasites that could use magic.
Moreover, parasites did not get tired, especially the army commanders who had absorbed divinities. Could this be an extremely dangerous situation? Just as Yun Seohui thought so and got up. Krrrrrrrrrrr. A sudden tremor shook the entire building. The tremor sprang up from deep within the earth. The sudden trembling caused Yun Seohui and the young man to lose their balance and fall. Chairs shook back and forth and tables slid to the side like there was a huge earthquake. Soon, screams erupted. After arriving without a warning, the earthquake lasted close to 5 minutes. Just now,
Yun Seohui's eyes shone sharply under the protection of a barrier she'd cast. The young man, who was stuck in the corner of the room, only gaped his mouth. Yun Seohui shot up and ran outside.
Total chaos unfolded before her. It wasn't as if buildings crumbled down or the earth cracked up, but people were in great confusion from the sudden tremor. Did an earthquake really happen in Scheherazade?
Yun Seohui shook her head. That couldn't be the case as she felt 4 changes immediately after the earthquake. The first was that the city changed into a strange space filled with odd vibrations. The second was that the mana flowing through her mana circuit was seeping out. The third was that this mana was seeping into the earth, joining a huge flow of energy and heading in one direction.
And the fourth?
When she subconsciously followed the direction of the flowing mana, she saw the Scheherazade royal palace in the distance. Unless she was seeing things, the location of the palace seemed to have changed since the last time she checked. Yun Seohui subconsciously infused her mana into the communication crystal. However, the crystal was not reacting.
The mana that she infused into it leaked out and disappeared. It was like it was being pulled by a magnetic force.
That wasn't all. What the hell is going on? Someone cried out from the temple. What happened?
The portal disappeared.
What? The warp gate isn't working. Yun Seohui's eyes narrowed. A mysterious earthquake, mana flowing in one direction, and the warp gate malfunctioning. As she was thinking, a gust of wind carrying powerful energy swept by and struck Yun Seohui's cheeks.
She wasn't the only one.
Other people seemed to have felt this energy as well.
The murmuring instantly subsided.
A heavy silence descended. Despite no one saying a word, they were all thinking the same thing.
The cause of this incident was getting closer. Something that was large enough to devour this city in one gulp. It was then. Pa! Someone pointed at the sky and screamed.
Yun Seohui looked up. The sky beyond the lofty castle wall was turning black. Before she could take a second look, the filthy black tide dyed the sky in its color and flooded Scheherazade.
Shriek! Hundreds of bat-winged shadows cut through the air at speeds rivaling planes, no, jets.
Same time.
Rose Scheherazade was standing alone in the deepest area of the royal palace. In the direction she was looking was a stone chamber where a huge magic circle was drawn on the ceiling and the floor with a large pillar of light standing tall. The light grew intense as more mana flowed into the stone chamber, and her eyes twinkled with more and more light. Rose Scheherazade had just activated the first level of Gorad Boga's mechanism.
Consequently, the whole of Gorad Boga turned into a huge magic circle, which began to scrape up mana inside the city.
This included the mana of both humans and structures. In a way, the first level was only a preparation for the activation of the second level. Rose Scheherazade stared at the steel that was floating inside the pillar and then suddenly lifted her chin up. The rumbling of the earth, the explosives booms, and the unintelligible screams. The faint amalgamation of these sounds mixed together to make her ears happy. Rose Scheherazade smiled beamingly.
Can you hear it?" She spread out her arms as if to show off her own work of art.
"Dear," showing a smile that was brighter than any other. "It is a requiem for you,"
she whispered silently in the empty space. "Do you know what that child said?"
"What use is there in getting revenge now? Doing so will only leave you with emptiness." She then sniggered softly.
"But, what is this?"
Her eyes lost focus like a woman who lost herself from the ecstasy of orgasm.
"I only just began my revenge. I only just got a taste, but never mind feeling empty. It's so sweet. It's so sweet that I—"
Rose Scheherazade gently closed her eyes without finishing her sentence. Ah, this feeling of liberation.
After her husband died of a mysterious cause, Gorad Boga had been her only place of peace. Every time she suffered indescribable humiliation, she would come here to cry and seek her husband, apologizing until she fainted from exhaustion. However, today would be the last day this place was used for such a purpose. Because as of today, both Xinjiang and this city would disappear.
Furthermore, it would be the start of humanity's downfall. Ha! Rose Scheherazade moaned blissfully as she heard the ringing above the ceiling.
She then unbuttoned the front part of her dress as if she couldn't help herself. SSSK. Her dress slipped down, and her naked body was revealed in full.
Next, Rose Scheherazade raised one arm and one leg high. Using the earthling's screams as accompaniment, she began to spin as if she was performing a ballet. Inside an empty stone chamber, a naked woman danced by herself, rolling a tongue around her lips like someone savoring the taste of sweet chocolate. Asterisk.
It took 6 days to get to Scheherazade from Eva.
If one rushed, it would take 4 days.
As Sol Jihu noticed the abnormality on the 4th night, there was only 1 day's worth of distance to cover.
He already did everything he could.
He ordered Kim Hannah to notify every city beside Nur and got every organization inside Scheherazade on the move.
The result was a loss of communication.
After hearing from Yun Sayahui that Rose Scheherazade disappeared, he told her the path to get to Gorad Boga.
He failed to get in touch with her since. He could send faint signals with the communication crystal, but the other side was not picking up. Even sending the signal should not be possible if the parasites were jamming the communication.
Sol Jihu grew impatient as this was a first for him as well. In the end, he got off the carriage midway and rushed to Scheherazade with only Floan and Little Chick. The Horus had grown tired from running all night, and even if it ran at full speed, it was still slower than Floan's flying speed. Though he couldn't call this an ideal situation, the urgency of the matter left him with no other choice.
Thankfully, they were closing in on their destination with Floan giving her all in flying.
While cutting through the sky at a frightening speed.
"Over there!" Floan's voice suddenly rang out. Sol Jihu, who had constantly been trying to use the communication crystal, looked up. The city began to enter his sight. And when Scheherazade got big enough so that he couldn't capture it with a single look.
Quote! Sol Jihu's brows twitched violently after confirming the state the city was in.
Chapter 418.
He dearly wished that this wouldn't be the case and was even slightly hopeful, but the reality was callously cold. Scheherazade, seen at a close distance, was a scene of chaos. Thick clouds of black smoke rose from the city engulfed in fire, and dozens of screams were erupting from multiple locations. Sol Jihu had finally arrived at Scheherazade, but after flying up with Floan's help and looking down at the city, he couldn't help but become speechless.
Pandemonium. There was no other word better fit to describe this living hell. Scheherazade had already been seized completely.
Not a single show of resistance could be seen. Most were running toward the gate, trying to save their lives above all else, and the enemy was freely killing the escaping people.
Sol Jihu became more and more impatient as the situation grew tense. "Calm down."
Perhaps due to the effect of clear mirror still water, his head cooled off, and he regained his composure. After doing a quick scan of the city, he saw a couple of things worth noting.
First, people were only heading to the city gates, not the temple. Second, there were succubi visible in sight. What these two signified was clear.
The warp gate was disabled, and at least one army commander, and likely more, had appeared in Scheherazade.
Damn it.
Sol Jihu bit his lower lip.
Though it wasn't confirmed, he considered the fall of Nur as a matter of fact.
To conquer a city in a single night, a suitably sized force was needed. As such, he expected the appearance of army commanders to an extent. But the fact that the warp gate was disabled meant something else.
I had no choice. Damn it. Our path of retreat vanished as soon as the siege started. What was I supposed to do when we were attacked from both the inside and outside?
A part of the future he saw back then had come true.
Though he couldn't be sure, it probably had something to do with Gorad Boga's activation. In any case, it seemed like the golden hour had already passed.
But that obviously didn't mean he would take his hands off and do nothing. Soon, Sol Jihu's eyes lit up while thoroughly scanning the city. He saw a group inside the Scheherazade royal palace, resisting with all their might without anywhere to go.
He saw a familiar face behind the group.
Judging by the way she was kneeling on the ground, panting, it seemed she had exhausted her mana.
There was no reason to delay. Flown. Fly to the palace. Flown flew toward the palace before letting go. While descending, Sol Jihu put his left hand forward and roused his mana. Several mana spears instantly formed in front of his palm before transforming into sword chi and shooting down. Quang, 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 quang. The lightning-clad sword chi mercilessly bombarded the area around the gate. Succubi that were driving the earthlings into a corner screamed. Their heads and limbs were blown up by the sword chi that suddenly descended from the sky. Those that survived looked up at the intruder, but Sol Jihu had already landed on the ground and was swinging the spear of purity in a wide, horizontal motion. Golden sword chi shot out of the spear blade, drawing an arc and severing the bodies of the succubi that were left standing, in half. Are you okay? Sol Jihu turned his gaze after subduing the palace in an instant. Yun Seahui sat with her mouth agape. She was not expecting Sol Jihu to come this quickly. Our representative Sol. What happened? Why did Scheherazade suddenly? We survived. Let's hurry up. The earthlings that saw the reinforcement chattered in relief, but Sol Jihu kept his eyes on Yun Seahui. Where's Scheherazade? I don't know. Yun Seahui collected her senses and quickly shook her head. The city changed after a sudden earthquake, and then the parasites invaded. Her face was pale, and she was having trouble talking. Sol Jihu realized why. Her mana. She was slowly being drained of her mana. This had to be the effect of Gorad Boga as well. It went without saying that this wasn't a good thing. They were already in a disadvantageous position, and the draining effect only made it harder. Sol Jihu could understand why people gave up on defending the city and were running away. Flown, take care of Miss Yun Seahui. The black smoke floated over and coiled around Yun Seahui's arms. First, Sol Jihu cut himself off. He had two choices, either to retreat from the city or to remain and fight until reinforcements arrived. Of course, he knew the latter choice was near impossible. He only rushed to the city ahead of his comrades because he was confident in escaping alone if things went wrong. Gathering the remaining forces and holding the ground wasn't even an option he considered. Moreover, he didn't know the exact strength of the invading force. And so, just as he was about to ask Yun Seahui, he hurriedly turned to the main entrance. Next, Sol Jihu's expression distorted gravely. Hundreds of succubi were folding their bat wings and descending from the sky. There was one particular succubus that gave off an enormous presence. Oh! Who's this? To no one's surprise,
A violet-haired being with blood-colored eyes walked out from the crowd with light steps. Did Prince Charming come to save his princess? The 6th Army commander, Vulgar Chastity, appeared.
Sol Jihu slicked his hair back and glared at Vulgar Chastity,
who was arrogantly holding her head high.
How did she notice and get here so quickly?
Then again, it wasn't so surprising given how he shredded the succubi in the area.
You should have given me a call if you came, Tilda. You surprised the heck out of me, you know? Sol Jihu collected his breath as he stared at the taunting Vulgar Chastity. Now wasn't the time to go easy. It was best to go all out from the start.
But didn't you come just a little too late? The city is all ready. Vulgar Chastity, who was murmuring with a shrug, suddenly flinched.
It was because Sol Jihu's glaring eyes turned red. At the same time, an indescribably fierce killing intent swept over her. Sol Jihu's mouth dropped open in a split second. Level 7 Starseeker, Awakening Skill, Berserk. Hoo-ah!
A scream that could hardly be called a human being's burst out.
While Vulgar Chastity flinched, Sol Jihu raised his arm and brandished his spear.
Each time the spear blade cut through the air, an invisible golden ripple hurled out and transformed into a gust of wind. A storm erupted in the blink of an eye.
Level 7 Starseeker, Secret Art, Mutilation. Shriek.
A sharp blade of wind brushed past Vulgar Chastity's face. If she hadn't turned instantaneously, her head would have been severed in half. Vulgar Chastity spread her wings and flew up in a startle. Then, she gritted her teeth as the army she gathered were being mutilated by golden lines.
You.
However, she couldn't afford to get angry because Sol Jihu was running at her with bloodshot eyes.
Vulgar Chastity reacted swiftly.
The two seemed to cross paths in midair before intertwining back and forth and soaring up to the sky.
Boom, 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 boom.
Vulgar Chastity doubted her ears while frantically dodging a flurry of thrusts.
Boom. Ah! Her head almost exploded when she flinched. Sol Jihu was retracting his spear, but a formless spear had targeted her head. That wasn't all. Each brandishing of his spear followed a huge boom as if explosions were going off. She could not look down on the power of his attacks. Vulgar Chastity didn't just take it lying down. Tens of thousands of hair strands soared up in an instant and hurled towards Sol Jihu like venomous snakes. In the next instant, however, Vulgar Chastity was shocked speechless. Sol Jihu had only swept the air with his hand, but the hair strands that were flying toward him had all circled back toward her. It was the grand cosmic shift. Ah! Taken aback, Vulgar Chastity reflexively retrieved the energy she put into her hair strands. When she looked forward again, she saw a flurry of sword chi flying toward her. What? How is he so strong? It wasn't to this degree at the time of the Tiggle Fortress War. Vulgar Chastity hurriedly shot up while screaming internally. She became dazed immediately afterward. Tong! It was because the sound of air exploding rang out, followed by a bone-chilling killing intent that crept up on her. When she subconsciously turned her head and looked up, she saw Sol Jihu aiming his spear at her head. He had predicted her movement and moved accordingly with ethereal shift. The spear blade cut down with an earth-severing intensity. Vulgar Chastity twisted her head, narrowly dodging it by a tiny margin, and then gritted her teeth. That's enough. She grabbed the spear shaft and instantaneously pulled hard, and Sol Jihu's face got closer. As they exchanged a glance at close quarters, Vulgar Chastity's eyes glowed with neon light. She tried to hypnotize him, but it was futile. She was expecting as much anyway, so she opened her mouth, letting out a poisonous gas that swallowed Sol Jihu. Ha! Serves you right for being so cocky. Vulgar Chastity muttered with the spear of purity in hand. However, her expression turned sour in the next moment. A tri-circular shield was floating above the left arm he held in front of him. Blessing of the Circum. One of the tricircular shields turned black and fell.
Vulgar Chastity stared in a daze before she abruptly felt a shiver run down her spine. How could he have such relaxed eyes in the middle of this chaotic battle?
For someone who had eyes that were dripping with red light, he was paradoxically calm and collected. It was as if he didn't care about anything other than taking her life. They were close enough to have their noses touch each other.
After the merest fraction of a second, Sol Jihu pulled his head back and then rammed forward.
Crack! The dual horns on Vulgar Chastity's forehead broke as a powerful force traveled into her brain. Cack! While Vulgar Chastity gaped her mouth from shock, Sol Jihu let go of the Spear of Purity. He then embraced his enemy, rubbed her back, and then grabbed her protruding wings. Vulgar Chastity held her breath. Why? Before she could finish, she felt a powerful force pulling on her wings. Quack! The bat wings tore off easily. Kyaaaack! A piercing scream burst out at last. Vulgar Chastity plummeted to the ground, and Sol Jihu chased after her, the Spear of Purity flying back into his hand. Quang! As he crushed down on Vulgar Chastity's stomach after she struck the ground, streams of blood poured out of her mouth. Kook! She wanted to release her divinity, but Sol Jihu was already striking down with his spear as if he would not give her the chance. Then, just as he was about to skewer her, clang! The Spear of Purity flew into the air with a metallic ring. Sol Jihu glanced to the side, having let go of his spear from a sudden impact. He couldn't feel anything until it came up to him. Rather than energy, it seemed right to say that he was struck with sound. As if to prove his conjecture, he felt a ringing in his left ear. He also felt two presences that rivaled Vulgar Chastity's. Two army commanders. Along with this thought, a high-frequency sound wave dug into his eardrums. Sol Jihu briefly breathed in through his nose. This attack seemed difficult to stop, so he had to fall back and avoid it. But he also didn't want to let go of the fish that he had hooked up. Sol Jihu quickly took something out of his pocket and stuffed it into Vulgar Chastity's mouth. Then, before the high-frequency sound wave that struck him pierced the rest of his body, he used ethereal shift and got out of the spot. Kook! The panting Vulgar Chastity felt her mind blank out. Looking down, she saw a large piece of rock, half of which was peeking out of her mouth. The rock was reacting to Sol Jihu's mana and letting out blue light. UUP. Realizing what it was, Vulgar Chastity tried to spit it out in a hurry. But flash! The palm-sized rock cold-heartedly erupted with a powerful light. Next, a cross-shaped blue light flashed from the center of Vulgar Chastity's mouth. Boom! Boom! A thunderous noise echoed out, and a terrifying explosion rippled out on the land. What? Exploding Patience, who came to help Vulgar Chastity, drew a deep breath as she saw the frightening explosion. How? Even a thunder. It wasn't a normal thunder. It was a special thunder that the dwarves gifted to Sol Jihu for his help in the Tiggle Fortress War. As far as its potency went, it had the same power as 10 normal thunders combined. Soon, when the explosion subsided, Exploding Patience gasped under her breath. Vulgar Chastity was in such terrible shape that pitiful didn't begin to describe her. Keek! Keek! The way she spasmed periodically, it didn't look like she was dead, but her chin was blown off completely, gushing out blood like a fountain, and her upper body was also eaten, revealing charred bones. Her scorched skin foamed with bubbles or cracked up like an arid land suffering from a drought. At this point, her broken horns and torn wings didn't even look like injuries. Peetst! At that moment, another crackling of electricity was heard. Exploding Patience's expression contorted. Having activated Thousand Thunder, Sol Jihu turned around, discharging electricity from his entire body. He then kicked off the ground and flew toward the Banshee Queen that was floating in the air. Pang! 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 Activating Festina earring 3 times, he shot toward his target like an arrow. It was as if he was saying, "Now it's your turn." Seeing his terrifying charging speed surpassing her wildest imaginations, Exploding Patience flew back urgently at full speed. As much as she hated acknowledging it, the enemy was strong. It might be a different story if she was Sung Shi-hyun or Unsightly Humility, who were both well versed in close combat, or an all-rounder fighter like Twisted Kindness. But as an army commander who was specialized in curses and witchcraft, fighting this man at close range seemed like a surefire way to end up like Vulgar Chastity. Exploding Patience certainly did not make the wrong judgment. However, she immediately made a confused face. It was because Sol Jihu, who had been charging at her like an enraged bull, saw her flying back and immediately circled back. Son of a bitch. Realizing that she had been tricked, Exploding Patience shot out a sound wave accompanying her anger. However, she was growing more and more impatient on the inside. It was because Sol Jihu had used Ethereal Shift and was just about to reach Vulgar Chastity. At this point, it was almost given that he would reach her comrade before her attack would reach him. A parasite army commander was going to die without releasing her divinity? So absurdly? Really? Seeing Sol Jihu striking down with his spear, Exploding Patience became stunned. It was then. Come! 6 domains of the Desire Realm. A subliminal shout resounded on the battlefield. From the vertices of the hexagram, which had appeared in the sky before anyone noticed, 6 bolts of lightning struck down. Each of the blood-colored lightning bolts flew toward Sol Jihu, who had approached Vulgar Chastity to finish her off. Sol Jihu's eyes widened for the first time. He remembered seeing the same attack in the spirit realm. It was the attack that instantly sent Raging Temperance into a groggy state. If struck, he would die without a doubt. In that instant, Sol Jihu moved swiftly. Having used Thousand Thunder earlier, just to be safe, came in handy. The electricity dyeing his body congregated to the tip of his spear, becoming a dot. Sol Jihu's unique spatial ability, Hell Severing. Shooting out the lightning simultaneously, a terrifying flurry of lightning erupted out. Zeet! The lightning of the 6 domains, which could incinerate even the gods, and over 3,000 golden lightning bolts intertwined and fought in a magnificent scene. Damn it! Sensing the high-frequency sound wave aiming at his back a beat late, Sol Jihu gritted his teeth. There were 3 army commanders. While he managed to take one out of commission from the start, Twisted Kindness, who was said to be the strongest army commander, appeared. In the end, judging that there was no other choice, Sol Jihu used Ethereal Shift to avoid Exploding Patience's attack. Then, quote, ! He realized his mistake immediately afterward. He felt a chilling sword strike cutting toward his flank. It was Twisted Kindness. The 7th Army commander was swinging her twin swords at the exact spot he moved to. It was as if she knew what he would do and where he would go. Sol Jihu instinctively came to a realization as soon as the sharp blade touched his body. I can't avoid this one. The blade would cut him apart before he could even use Ethereal Shift. And this thought was quickly becoming a reality. Wish! In the next instant, Twisted Kindness furrowed her brows. Her sword certainly sliced through the right area, but it looked like Sol Jihu's body disappeared for a second before reappearing. Don't tell me. Right. Sol Jihu had activated the Blessing of the World Tree, the special power of the Ego Te Defendere that Vidalith had gifted him. By phasing his body and soul to the spirit realm for a second, Sol Jihu had completely nullified Twisted Kindness' attack. The price of allowing a turn was a counterattack. By the time Twisted Kindness noticed this, Sol Jihu was already holding the Spear of Purity up high. Next, as Twisted Kindness raised her left arm, the Spear of Purity drew an arc, shooting out golden sword chi. Kook! Zeesk! Twisted Kindness felt a sizzling pain invade deep into her forearm while teleporting out.
Upon securing a safe distance and inspecting her injury, she saw her left forearm gushing out a fountain of blood.
She couldn't put her strength into it, and the rate of recovery had slowed down as well. Clang! The sword in her left hand slipped out and fell to the ground.
After a moment of violent wriggling, the arm went limp.
Just what? Twisted Kindness stared dazedly with a dumbfounded face. Seol Ji-hoo lightly landed on the ground. Twisted Kindness stared at the man, fighting against 3 army commanders and quietly collecting his breath, in disbelief. Suddenly, she recalled a conversation she had with unsightly humility. Right after the Tigil Fortress War, they were comparing Sung Shi-hyun and Seol Ji-hoo. I don't plan to fault you for seeing the First Army commander in higher regard. I'm sure the judgment comes from your experience.
But it seems, what you experienced is different from what I experienced.
It might sound like I'm talking about someone else, but if you were to ask me.
At the time, when she said Seol Ji-hoo was no match for Sung Shi-hyun, unsightly humility said this.
That man is stronger. Far more than the First Army commander. Chapter 419. Ro Scheherazade waited for the commotion outside to intensify before leaving the ruin. The road to the center of Gorad Boga was a complicated maze, so she went to greet Sung Shi-hyun and abhorrent Charity to guide the way. For the queen to personally come to greet the invaders of her kingdom. That's some really messed up shit. But if what they say is true, I understand why you'd go to such lengths. So you have heard about me? Despite Sung Shi-hyun's sarcastic tone, Ro Scheherazade remained smiling. Of course I did. I used to work for Sinyoung. I'm sure you know better than anyone that there are a lot of perverts among their executives. Disgusting bastards who fulfill the perverse desires that they are unable to show on earth, in paradise. Yes, well, you have accurately described their former representative. So what exactly did you hear? Was it at a bar? One of the executives bragged that you had to go to the restroom, but he made you go in front of him. It was disgusting. Even I can't get it up looking at someone else's shit. Oh, just thinking about it again makes me sick. Abhorrent Charity covered his face with his tentacles, clearly disgusted. Did that really happen? He's lying, right? So they're telling that story like it's some sort of heroic tale. I expected as much. Ro Scheherazade replied without batting an eye. Do you want me to bring you that son of a bitch? You've done a lot for us, so I'll give you a chance to do the same to him. I appreciate your offer, but I'm fine. I don't enjoy watching someone defecate like some kind of an animal. Shit. So it really was true. Sung Shi-hyun was about to click his tongue, then stopped. He glanced behind him with narrowed eyes. Then he told the rest to go on without him and disappeared like the wind. Ro Scheherazade only shrugged and continued through the maze with an elegant gait. At last, they reached the center of the ruins, though Sung Shi-hyun was no longer with them. Is that? Yes. Ro Scheherazade nodded at abhorrent Charity's question. The pillar of light you're looking at is the source of the power of Gorad Boga. Ho! Abhorrent Charity could not conceal his awe when he saw the surface of the mana inside the pillar of light slowly rise to the top. It looks like the pillar is almost full. Only the first phase has been activated currently. Once the mana reaches the magic circle on the ceiling, we'll be able to activate Phase 2. Phase 1 changes the structure of the ruin to draw mana from all over the city. So it's essentially a preparatory step for Phase 2. You're right. Once the mana is fully charged, we'll be able to activate a large, powerful barrier that covers the entire city. A barrier triggered by such an enormous magic circle. The center of the circle is that source over there. Even if the barrier is damaged, it can be repaired as long as the source is intact, and even if the mana is depleted, once recharged, the barrier can be used repeatedly. Ho! This barrier can turn a small amount of external force into mana and use it to repair itself? Indeed, this magic circle is much too advanced for humans to make. Rose Scheherazade smiled at the hooded monster, muttering to himself.
The third army commander of the parasites was called the Necromancer, but before that, he was an archlik, and much before that a revered grand magician and sage. Perhaps that was why he was able to recognize Gorad Boga's true nature from the limited information given.
This barrier would have lasted for dozens of days even against all 7 of us. That is, assuming the enemy provided the magic circle a steady supply of mana, of course. This could have been troublesome to get rid of.
I thank you for your cooperation. Abhorrent Charity bowed lightly at the queen.
Rose Scheherazade gave a mystical smile.
How come you're more human than?
Ah, you used to be one, right?
Pardon?
It's nothing.
The queen giggled to herself and then pointed to the pillar of light.
Anyway, the steel inside the pillar is what you want, right? Well, it would be best if I could take it with me. A limp tentacle stretched out of Abhorrent Charity's sleeve and stroked his chin.
But the source itself is a powerful barrier. It will take at least a month of working together for Twisted Kindness and me to be able to put our hands in.
Hoo hoo hoo.
Low laughter escaped the hood. But you don't have to worry. Now that we're here, your dream will most certainly become reality.
It is, in fact, already in the process of becoming a reality. Rose Scheherazade straightened her shoulders and looked up at the pillar with eyes glistening with hope. The mana inside the pillar was only seconds away from reaching the ceiling. Asterisk. Kyaak! Blood spurted from Vulgar Chastity's mouth. Her eyes, white with shock,
slowly regained their light. Her eyeballs circled in their sockets with great difficulty, and when they found Sol Jihu, they began to shake.
The same was true of other army commanders.
Not only Exploding Patience but also Twisted Kindness hesitated to approach Sol Jihu. The 7th Army commander was especially shocked.
She recalled that the enemy wasn't as strong as he was now back when they fought in the spirit realm. Only a year had passed since then, yet he had become a monster on a whole new dimension. His speed of growth was extraordinary and unprecedented.
Could it be?
Suddenly, the parasite queen's words crossed her mind. According to the queen, the brightest star could grow on his own without anyone's assistance, but when put under pressure, his growth rate would increase exponentially.
The Spirit Realm expedition and the Tiggle Fortress War seemed to have triggered the brightest star's growth.
And the parasites had only recently begun to move again.
This time their main target was humanity, and as a result the brightest star appeared before them faster than ever before. If they fail again. The muscles of Twisted Kindness' throat moved as she swallowed.
She took a step back unwittingly. She dared not attack him, for in her mind there was the image of the brightest star shining even brighter than he was now. Not 1, not 2, but 3 army commanders were struggling against one human.
But the truth was that Sol Jihu wasn't in his best condition either. He went all out from the beginning and beat up Vulgar Chastity and left a deep scar on Twisted Kindness' arm.
Perhaps this was as far as he could go. He had used numerous artifacts during the earlier brawl.
Blessing of the Circum and Festina earring had already reached their maximum number of uses. The same was true of Ego Te Defendere after saving his life. That wasn't all. The successive use of advanced skills greatly exhausted him.
On top of that, he could feel his remaining mana slowly draining out of his body. And he had already used a special thunder that he had only a few from the beginning. Now the choice of a prolonged war was basically gone.
What should I do? Originally, he had planned to enter Gorad Boga no matter what, alone if necessary, but now he was unable to move because of the 2 army commanders in front of him.
Sol Jihu glanced around quickly, chewing on his lips.
It seemed that all the trapped earthlings were able to escape because there was no one nearby. The only comrade he had was Floan, whose face was hardened with anxiety, and Yun Seahui in Floan's arms.
He knew that running away wasn't a good choice.
The enemy's goal was to capture Scheherazade.
But there wasn't much time for hesitation. He was becoming more and more disadvantaged over time. If another army commander appeared now, Sol Jihu would surely die. It would be best to wait for his comrades to arrive before trying anything. Finally, Sol Jihu decided to retreat before it was too late. Flown! Yeah! Flown quickly soared to the sky with Yun Seahui in her arms.
Sol Jihu also rose to the air using ethereal shift continuously.
I won't let you escape.
Exploding Patience hurried after them, but stopped in astonishment when Sol Jihu pulled a handful of blue stones out of his pocket and threw them at her.
It wasn't just one. It was a fistful. See, crazy bastard.
Exploding Patience hurried back, for she saw what had happened after the enemy stuffed a special thunder into Vulgar Chastity's mouth.
Twisted Kindness also jumped back in surprise and used the spatial movement magic to escape the bombing range. TK, 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 TK. The sound of blue stones rolling on the ground resounded.
Exploding Patience, who had been running as fast as she could, stopped suddenly.
She glanced back slowly. There was no explosion, no nothing. She saw nothing but a bunch of blue stones on the ground. Upon closer examination, she realized that these weren't thunders, but ordinary stones painted blue. Quote ellipsis quote.
Exploding Patience lifted her head with a puzzled look. But Sol Jihu was nowhere to be seen.
He had already retreated beyond the walls. Her body shook with fury. Son of a bitch. Twisted Kindness also gave a dumbfounded laugh.
Why are you calling him names?
You should be blaming yourself. Suddenly they heard a sarcastic voice. Twisted Kindness turned around and saw Sung Shihyun walking towards them.
Where have you been?
At Gorad Boga. I wanted to see it with my own eyes at least once.
Sung Shihyun replied simply, then clicked his tongue as he looked around.
But I quit halfway through. I was getting bored, and I felt like something might have happened here,
he said as he watched Vulgar Chastity slowly pull herself up from the ground. Then Sung Shihyun shook his head and spoke with a sigh.
Well, I commend you for letting him escape at the right time. As I said, our battlefield isn't Scheherazade.
He escaped.
Twisted Kindness interjected. Sung Shihyun arched one eyebrow. The dragon grasped her limp left arm with her right hand and lifted it. The long scar on her arm was still bleeding. She had accepted the parasite queen's authority into her body and completely digested her divinity, so the wound had to be healed immediately. But instead, it continued to reopen. Sung Shihyun frowned. Godslaying authority. Fuck, does that mean he's already an apostle? So he's at least level 7. It's not just godslaying. Gazing into the deep wound, Twisted Kindness clenched her teeth. Spear of Purity, the spear that annihilates evil. The power of lightning, the most destructive of all anti-evil energy. He also added the effects of Righteous Heart and strengthened his circuit to boost their power. The 7th Army commander was saying that Sol Jihu's skills were designed to inflict the greatest damage on evil, and godslaying was only one of the many skills in harmony. And she was right. Sol Jihu's hardware was obviously amazing, but his software, or the way he configured his settings, was all the more special. The 7 sins had succeeded in making the ultimate weapon to combat not only with the army commanders but also against the parasite queen. I understand now. Twisted Kindness murmured, looking down at her own wound. She finally realized why the parasite queen was so worried. We can't put this off any longer. Forget about the steel. We have to kill him now. We have to. That's the right thing to do. Twisted Kindness lifted her gaze from her arm and asserted firmly. She's right. Exploding Patience agreed angrily. First Army Commander, you said you had a plan. A plan to kill that son of a bitch for good. What should we do now? Vulgar Chastity staggered to her feet. Her body was covered with wounds, but her face gleamed with resentment towards Sol Jihu. The eyes of the 3 army commanders met.
Sung Shi-hyun was a bit taken aback.
Earlier, they were clearly dissatisfied with his plan. And now finally their hearts had united and become one.
Sung Shi-hyun repeatedly blinked and began to nod.
This may be the first time I'm glad I changed sides. Took you long enough. He muttered calmly and grinned. You were right not to chase after him.
Who knows? His friends may come at us from all sides.
Maybe the Federation, too.
Again, this was assuming the worst. This time, however, no one refuted. Because they just witnessed the what-if scenario Sung Si-hyun had warned them about.
The difference wasn't a single step, but a half step. What if the enemy had arrived half an hour? No, just 10 minutes earlier than them. What would have happened then?
Like I said, we can't fight here. Scheherazade is right in the middle of the enemy territory. It's an ideal place for him to create new variables. The heart of Sung Shi-hyun's plan was that they had to fight in a place where they could kill Sol Ji-hoo with utmost certainty. Rather than chasing after the enemy and risk being caught up in what could be a trap, it was better to create a situation in which they could win 100%, even if it took more time. The fact that they arrived this early means they know what we're after. But you don't have to worry. Sung Shi-hyun continued. Now that Scheherazade is in our hands, half of my plan is already done.
And he's a complex thinker.
If we move as he expects, he'll move as we expect. And if he doesn't?
Doesn't matter. All we have to do now is keep an eye on the enemy's movements and respond accordingly.
Sung Shi-hyun finished and turned to the Scheherazade palace.
Well then.
A smile spread across his mouth as he stared at the ominous palace. Shall we begin?
Asterisk.
Sol Ji-hoo stopped only after a considerable distance was between him and Scheherazade.
He looked back to check, but no one was following. He only saw gray smoke rising above the walls of the city.
The capital of humanity, Scheherazade, had fallen. The lucky ones might have been able to escape through the gate, but most were probably killed during the invasion. Yun Seahui would have been one of the victims if Sol Ji-hoo had not rushed in and beat vulgar chastity to a pulp to save her.
Looking at the city burning with flames, Yun Seahui said quietly, "Thank you." Her voice sounded weak.
You saved me. Sol Ji-hoo let out a long sigh. Yun Seahui trembled slightly as the action seemed to impose some sort of blame on her.
She turned her eyes carefully.
The only hero of humanity to be revered by the Federation. The brightest star, feared by the army commanders and the queen of the parasites.
The apostle candidate of Gula, loved by all gods. Level 7 Starseeker, Sol Ji-hoo. Representative Sol. I begged you. She was about to say something, but Sol Ji-hoo interrupted her.
His voice was cold. Yun Seahui flinched when she met a look of hostility.
She clenched her teeth and opened her eyes sharply. I had no choice.
Then she raised her voice to defend herself.
It's not that I didn't, I couldn't.
The situation didn't allow me to grant your request.
I didn't have the resources to do anything. If you thought you couldn't, you should have.
As soon as our communication was over, the city began to shake and the warp gate stopped working and the parasites came.
All in the blink of an eye. Tell me, what should I have done?
Sol Ji-hoo shut his mouth. Somehow this situation, this conversation, felt familiar.
What did Black Sol Ji-hoo do back then? And Yun Seahui? I don't need anything anymore. I just need to see that merciless bastard's face in despair. I need to see him kneel down in regret. Fine. Do as you like.
When the scene from the past, in which Yun Seahui voluntarily handed herself over to the enemy, unfolded again in his head, Sol Ji-hoo raised his chin and sighed one more time. This time, instead of Kim Hana, Sung Shi-hyun was in Scheherazade.
Representative Sol, I.
Just as Yun Seahui was about to speak in a pitiful voice.
Sol Ji-hoo flinched and Yun Seahui's eyes widened. The next moment their eyes turned in the same direction. Chapter 420. Strange mana suddenly crept up on his body. It was as if an invisible wave penetrated through him.
Just as Sol Jihu and Yun Seahui shut their mouths from the odd sensation.
Wong! A short but imposing noise resounded over the area. Next, white light began to glimmer in their line of sight.
The street lights illuminating the city flickered crazily as if they had gone mad. Moreover, terrifying energy could be felt rising up, one that seemed to be on the verge of bursting out of Scheherazad's deepest area.
Feeling a frightening pressure, Sol Jihu and Yun Seahui subconsciously moved backward. In the next moment, flash! The world in their eyes was dyed white.
At the same time, Sol Jihu faintly saw a pillar of light soaring up to the sky from the center of Scheherazad, spinning in a spiral and rippling out far and wide. By this time, the area had turned into a strange space where no sound could be heard.
Meanwhile, the light expanded its domain fast and wide, breaking through the city wall and rushing outside. In fact, it only took a second for it to cover the area where Sol Jihu was standing. Kook!
The light touched his body.
He didn't feel any killing intent or harmful energy. He was only pushed back.
The light pushed Yun Seahui and Sol Jihu out as if it would not let anyone into its sacred land. A few corpses that made their way out of the city were pushed further out.
The light didn't stop spreading until Sol Jihu was pushed 50 meters out. When Sol Jihu narrowly grabbed hold of himself, he instinctively raised his eyes.
His breath paused. A massive, seemingly endless barrier exuding a powerful holy power that made one's skin tremble surrounded Scheherazade in a grand manner.
Sol Jihu's expression contorted as he looked at the city. There are two powers lying dormant inside Scheherazade. No, it would be more correct to say there is one power split into two stages.
The first stage activates a mechanism that turns the entire city into a special territory, and the second stage releases the power of God stored in Gorad Boga to form a powerful barrier that envelopes the city.
Right, the second level of Gorad Boga had activated. How?
The first stage might be activatable, but it shouldn't be so easy to release the power of a god.
Did Scheherazade use the royal oath?
Otherwise, how could she have activated the second stage?
Damn it.
Sol Jihu furrowed his brows.
Looking back, there were quite a few existences inside Scheherazade that were bestowed with divinity.
If the first stage served as a preparatory step, activating the second stage might not have been so difficult. Despite having doubts, Sol Jihu dropped that line of thought and raised his spear.
He cut and slashed madly, but the barrier did not budge. Never mind a crack, not even a tiny ripple billowed out. It bounced off all of Sol Jihu's attacks as though they were comical. Sol Jihu gritted his teeth and retracted his spear. He could tell the situation was getting out of hand, but there was nothing he could do. Should I have stood my ground?
He regretted belatedly but shook his head shortly afterward.
Even if he stayed inside, he would have been pushed out by the barrier anyhow. He might have been slammed into the city wall or pushed out through the city gate if he was lucky.
How much time went by? Bek Haiju, Kazuki, Phi Sora, and Hoshino Urara rushed to Scheherazade at a frightening speed. They had jumped out of the carriage and raced to the city with the aid of mana because they were worried about Sol Jihu. They were confused when they saw Sol Jihu standing in a daze but stopped after seeing the giant barrier. Phi Sora, who was running in the sky with Numa's sky boots, almost fell down in shock when she saw Scheherazade.
Once some time went by, the remaining Valhalla members arrived. Their reaction was no different.
Once they arrived at the city, they stared at the vast barrier with dumbfounded faces. What the hell happened?
Sol!
What's up with the city? What happened here? Chohong and Hugo asked in a fluster.
Gorad Boga.
Seo Yuhui looked back and forth between the huge barrier and the dazedly standing Sol Jihu before closing her eyes and biting her lower lip. It was then.
A group appeared above the city wall.
Including the brutally beaten vulgar chastity, twisted kindness, exploding patience, and abhorrent charity were there too.
To top it off, you tilde. Beautiful morning. If you're asking how my day's going, that is tilde.
Sung Shi-hyun was there too, acting just as cocky as always.
Sol Ji-hoo gulped unnoticeably as he looked up at the city wall. There were 5 army commanders.
Since only 6 army commanders remained in paradise, it sufficed to say that almost all of the parasite's elite forces were invading the human territory. But it was still too early to be surprised. Soon, Sol Ji-hoo saw a woman skipping up to the city wall, butt naked.
She looked down and smiled brightly. It was Rose Scheherazade. What Sol Ji-hoo had been worried about the most came true. "Hello. It's nice to see you again." Rose Scheherazade spread her arms out and gently waved her hand. When Sol Ji-hoo glared at her with his mouth tightly shut, she tilted her head and raised the corner of her mouth. "I thought you'd be surprised. As I thought, you found out."
I guess I might have been in trouble if I was a little late.
How lucky tilde. Rose Scheherazade covered her mouth and laughed gracefully. Rose Scheherazade. Kazuki, who was watching with hawk eyes, calmly asked, "Is this your doing?" A loaded question came out. However, Rose Scheherazade, "Yes," answered without the slightest hesitation. Almost as if she was proud. By now, most of Valhalla's members realized what was going on. That Rose Scheherazade had helped the parasites invade and conquer the city. In other words, she was a traitor. Why? Why? Well. Rose Scheherazade pushed her lower lip up with her finger and rolled her eyes. "I guess you can say it's to avenge my husband."
"Avenge your husband?"
"Yes. My husband was killed by the Earthlings, you see." Rose Scheherazade spoke with clarity before looking down at Yun Seahui, who was sitting on the ground. Yun Seahui shook her head with a sour look. "There's no need to pretend to be oblivious. Well, you weren't the executive director back then, so I'm sure you weren't the one responsible for giving the order. Still, you knew about it, didn't you?" Everyone's gaze fell on Yun Seahui. I didn't know." Yun Seahui stuttered. "I was only told one day that Rose Scheherazade was poisoned to death. In the first place, there's no proof Sinyoung was behind it." Fufu, still acting so shameless. "Do you want to know how I found out?" Rose Scheherazade smiled gently. She took off the necklace hanging on her neck and raised it up for everyone to see. "I'm sure you all know what this is. It's the royal oath you coveted so much." The day we decided to serve the 7 sins, they bestowed 2 royal oaths to the Scheherazade royal family. One to my husband and one to me. Rose Scheherazade continued. "The day my husband was poisoned to death, a powerful divine protection was cast on me." A divine protection? Sol Ji-hoo doubted his ears. It came as a total surprise. "Shocked after hearing of my husband's death, I went to the temple, thinking that the divine protection was somehow related. And this is what the 7 sins told me." Rose Scheherazade cleared her throat. "My husband, Gairos, used the royal oath to protect my life, to not let my royal oath get stolen, and to not have me suffer the same fate he did." Sol Ji-hoo finally understood why his innate ability didn't work on Rose Scheherazade. It was because she was bestowed with the power of God, just like an executor. "Back then, I never thought you guys were the perpetrators. I'm sure Gairos thought the same with how you handle such matters." Rose Scheherazade took a light breath. "But, did you know?" And then said suggestively, "One day, while you guys were running around ransacking every corner of Scheherazade to find the perpetrator, one of your executives came to my room, his cheeks red from intoxication." Strength entered Rose Scheherazade's voice. "And while he was raping me, a widow, who was crying from the sorrow of having lost her husband, he had a slip of the tongue." Her voice trembled as she became more incensed.
I still remember it vividly. He was pulling my hair and whispering into my ear, "Damn gyros. You should have just handed it over."
Now that it's come to this, I'll make your wife hand it over herself. Realizing how heated she had gotten, Rose Scheherazade collected her breath and then continued calmly. As proof, you all have stopped demanding the royal oath after Gyros died. Though you were acting like you were sorry, it was because a restriction was placed on you, no? Yun Siohui's face paled.
A heavy silence descended. The entire city was dead silent, enough to let one hear others' breaths. That's when I swore to get revenge. But because I didn't have any power, I could only bide my time.
Then one day, I heard a voice inside Gorad Boga calling me. Rose Scheherazade shrugged. You crazy bitch. Chohong, who was listening silently, spat out a curse.
How can you?
Rose Scheherazade tilted her head. She looked like she couldn't understand why she was being criticized. Aren't you the queen?
You're supposed to be a ruler who takes responsibility for your kingdom. How can you cast aside your people and hand the city over to the enemy?
How can you call yourself a queen? Rose Scheherazade's eyebrow went up slowly. What is a queen?
What? Kingdom? People? Responsibility? What's that?
Rose Scheherazade raised her hands in a shrug. I don't know any of that. I didn't have a single authority as a queen, so I can only say that it's laughable that you ask me to take responsibility. I'm just a person, a woman who wants to avenge her beloved husband.
Chohong became speechless at Rose Scheherazade's shamelessness.
Just because of that. Just as she was about to lash out in anger.
Just?
Rose Scheherazade's brows twitched violently.
Just? Her gentle expression changed in an instant. Did you say, just?
Rose Scheherazade turned serious, her eyes widening to the point of physically tearing. It was so bad that her pupils looked like tiny beans inside the sclera. The way her pupils glared down from her abnormally widened eyes, she looked like a vengeful ghost filled with hatred.
What do you know?
A rough, scratchy voice shot out.
Being dragged to drinking parties, having to act cute and pour alcohol with both hands while my clothes were torn apart, shaking my butt like some cheap prostitute from the streets and panting like a whore in front of my husband's portrait while high on drugs. Can you say you know what that feels like?
Rose Scheherazade's throat and body both trembled visibly.
Yet you dare to say just?
I had to suffer unmentionable humiliation from the bastards who murdered my husband, yet you say just? Rose Scheherazade burst into laughter, the cackling sound ringing out in the otherwise silent area. Then you should have destroyed Sinyang. Why? Rose Scheherazade. Sol Jihu stretched his arm in front of Chohong, who was trying to shout back. Rose Scheherazade was not in the right mind. That much was easy to tell just by looking at her face. Her once virtuous and tender appearance was nowhere to be seen, and she had clearly lost her sanity. But now that her possession of the royal oath was confirmed, he had to get her to change her mind no matter what. Please. The laughter stopped at Sol Jihu's words. Rose Scheherazade's gaze moved slightly. Their eyes met. Looking up at her pupils, which seemed to be possessed by an evil spirit, Sol Jihu quietly said, I'd like you to reconsider. The disadvantageous position you were in as an individual against an organization, the unfair treatment you had to suffer due to people in positions of power, the inexplicable death of your husband, and the anger you felt after finding out the truth. Anyone would sympathize with you and understand you. Rose Scheherazade raised her chin and hm'd. Her chillingly frightening expression began to slowly fade away. But Sol Jihu shook his head while still meeting her eyes. This method, this choice, is definitely wrong. Before anyone noticed, Rose Scheherazade's face had returned to normal. I know. Her voice became soft again. I obviously know that I am wrong.
But does that matter at this point? What matters is whether I stop or not.
Rose Scheherazade
Staggered up to the wall and leaned against it.
Representative Sol. She rested her chin on her hands and grinned at Sol Jihu. You see, I actually thought about stopping. Just once. When? It was when Representative Sol came to Scheherazade.
Rose Scheherazade's expression turned hazy as she spoke like a dreaming girl.
I've been hearing a lot about you since long ago. Fighting for the Harem royal family that was being threatened like me. Taking care of the trash that were using the Eva royal family and even looking after their stupid queen and helping her grow. I saw it.
How beautiful and dignifying Charlotte Arya looked as she made her proclamation on stage.
She then cupped her hands together.
When I heard Representative Sol was coming, I wasn't able to sleep for days.
I shook with joy. I know it might sound immature, but I couldn't help it. I was looking forward to it too much. He's finally coming. He's finally reaching out to help me. I heard a few organizations already disappeared without a trace.
But what if Sin Young accepts the provisions? They're the main culprit. How can he forgive them so easily?
Sin Young is finally going to be destroyed.
How can I express this gratitude? He's putting in so much effort to make this world a better place.
Maybe when this all ends, I will also. Maybe this is what Gyros wanted too. She trailed off after chattering like a maiden in love. She knew how meaningless it was at this point. But Rose Scheherazade heaved out a deep sigh and dropped her hands to the side.
You told me this.
Her chin hit the wall.
Things will change, so wait just a little longer. Without a hint of being in pain, she shook her head, lying face down on the wall. No. Gaining a small authority will change nothing for me. Nothing at all, as long as Sin Young stands tall.
Her voice suddenly turned sharp.
Why didn't you do it?
At the same time, Rose Scheherazade straightened her upper body. All you had to do was destroy Sin Young. She asked as if she truly couldn't understand. I was on my knees too. I was hoping someone would come rescue me too.
She cried like a heroine from a drama.
You personally helped Teresa Hussey and Charlotte Arya up, so why not me?
She wept quietly.
You could have guided me too. I wanted to be like them too. Her throat trembled. So why did you leave after only holding my hand briefly?
And she shouted with a shaking voice.
Just why?
Her desperate scream echoed sonorously.